Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. We are going through the Fountainhead. This is the third meetup that we are doing. We are covering part one, the third part of part one. So we're going to start with presentations. Then please use pen and paper to keep track of all the observations that you have, all the questions that you have. You will have the opportunity of giving your own observations about what we have discussed, and I'll put a question on the table. All right, and then we will collect all the questions and we'll try to answer all of them. All right, that's the plan. We're going to start with Rob, followed by Maritza, followed by Sherri, followed by Rupali, and then Iris. Rob, the floor is yours.
Okay, so in this section, we're doing the last chunk of part one on Peter Keating, where Peter Keating is he gets the section header. This whole part of the book is named after him, so it's really his meteoric rise to fame and fortune. And the issue that really comes to the forefront here is the issue of selfishness. Now, later on in Ayn Rand's career as a writer and as a philosopher, selfishness is going to become something where self-interest is going to be something that she becomes associated with. She writes a whole book called The Virtue of Selfishness, basically making the case for rational self-interest as a moral theory. But here in the novel is where she really begins to wrestle with that. And the interesting way is that it comes out first and that you start seeing the word selfishness appear a whole bunch of times. And it appears in reference to Peter Keating. So on page 179, this is where he's talking about, he's anticipating becoming a partner in Franken and Heyer once Heyer kicks the bucket, because he's in, well, he kind of puts it that way, you know. So here's this passage. He's talking to Katie. And he says, besides, old Heyer won't last another month. The doctor told us we could expect a second stroke at any time, and that will be that. If it doesn't get him to the graveyard, it'll certainly get him out of the office. So he's pretty callous about it. And she replies, oh, Peter, I don't like to hear you talk like that. You mustn't be so terribly selfish. I am sorry, dear. Well, yes, I guess I'm selfish. Everybody is. And then a few pages later, after he's gone and induced Heyer's second stroke and basically, pushed him over the edge to the graveyard, he finds out that not only did he basically kill Lucius Heyer, but he finds out that Heyer had left everything to him in his will, and he now has this fortune and this porcelain collection of which he has no interest. And he goes off and is sort of, drinking to not have to think too much about the implications of this. And he says to himself, Catherine had said it. He was selfish. Everybody was selfish. It was not a pretty thing to be selfish, but he was not alone in it. He had merely been luckier than most. And then he says he hoped the useless questions would never come back to him again. Every man for himself, he muttered, falling asleep on the table. All right, so Peter Keating is sort of thinking of himself as, I'm a selfish guy. And he's wrestling with that and trying to come to terms with, well, it's okay to be selfish. Everybody's selfish. Now, whether everybody's selfish is kind of a question there, right? Because just because Peter Keating says it doesn't mean it's true. But what really struck me about this when he's talking about how he's selfish is this comes just like 20, 30 pages after this whole scene where Catherine shows up at his apartment unannounced one day. She's had a premonition, a very accurate premonition about Ellsworth Toohey, and what, that there's something malevolent about him. And she wants to get married to Peter right away. And after she leaves, Louisa Keating goes to work on him, right? His mom, Louisa Keating, the queen of the passive aggressive, goes to work on him, right? And fascinating thing, by the way, sort of a side issue, but fascinating thing about this scene is when Catherine shows up, Louisa Keating is very gracious to her. And after she leaves, Louisa Keating is apparently just ready to accept that he's going to marry Catherine. And he stops and says goodnight to her, and she doesn't say anything. It's like, it can be left at that and no problem. And it's Peter Keating who feels the need to then go get his mom's approval and find out what she thinks. So I think it's it's very deliberately put in there about how he could walk away and he would be allowed to do what he wants, but he can't do it. He gets drawn like a moth to a flame that I have to have her approval. I have to know what she wants. And of course,
he does the same thing when it comes to whether he should go to Franken's office or off to Paris too.
Exactly. When he's saying, maybe I should take the very beginning, he says, maybe I should take the École des Beaux-Arts. She says, well, if that's what you want, dear. And she never pushes these things on him overtly. That's why I say she's the queen of passive aggressive. She never pushes anything that says, you must do this. She's always like, whatever you want, Petey, I just want your best interests. But then she's got him so trained over years and years and years of this that he always has to go back and say, no, Mom, I really want to know what you think. And that's where she goes to work on him.
Full mode.
So she spends like 2 pages here, 153, 154, maybe about 155, and goes to work on him on saying that basically getting him to renounce marrying Katie. And what struck me about this is he says, oh, I'm selfish, everybody is. But the whole technique she uses, the whole note she hits here in getting him to renounce Katie is selflessness. So she says, let's see. Oh, I love this. This is the queen of passive aggression. Peter, I have no likes or dislikes as far as I'm concerned. I have no thought for myself at all because nothing in the world matters to me except you. It might be old-fashioned, but that's the way I am. I know I shouldn't be because children don't appreciate it nowadays, but I can't help it. So the whole guilt trip is right there. I mean, it's really, and I've seen this, by the way. I mean, people do this in real life. She's like Louisa Keating's an extreme case, but it's a real thing that happens. And by the way, notice that the whole thing about she has no interests of her own in life. She has no goals of her own in life. She just knows what's best for him. But then she tells him that he should not want what's best. He shouldn't have any goals or values in life. He should give them up for her. So it's a all foreshadowing of what Ellsworth Toohey is going to say much, much later on, where he says, his ideal is a world where no one has any thought except for the good of his neighbor, who has no thought except for the good of the next neighbor, and so on around the world, where all will suffer and none enjoy. Right. So this is the part of her critique of altruism and selflessness, is this idea that, you're sacrificing for somebody else who's sacrificing for you, and everybody's suffering and nobody's enjoying. Nobody has any actual values. But the real thing comes in page 154, is right after that little guilt trip she lays on him. Here's where she's saying, your life doesn't belong to you, Peter, if you're really aiming high. You can't allow yourself to indulge every whim as ordinary people can, because with them, it doesn't matter anyway. It's not you or me or what we feel, Peter. It's your career. It takes strength to deny yourself in order to win other people's respect. And that gets to the whole key of the Peter Keating selflessness, is that he thinks he's ambitious, and he thinks he tells himself, I'm ambitious, I'm selfish, I'm trying to rise to the top. But what he really is doing is he doesn't want to rise to the top because he's doing what he wants to do, because he's pursuing his values. He's doing it in order to win other people's respect. It's all about what other people want and how he can conform and adhere to what other people want and expect of him. So his selfishness, so-called selfishness, is actually not selfish at all, because it consists of him giving up everything he really wants in order to fulfill the expectations of other people. So that's where she has him referring to himself continually as selfish, even while she's very conspicuously and very deliberately undermining that by having all this stuff about how your life doesn't really belong to you. And she's, think of other people, not just about yourself. Louisa Keating hits that over and over and over again in this, and breaking him down and getting him to throw away the thing he really wants, which is Katie, in order to be success, but a success in the eyes of others by meeting other people's expectations and demands, rather than fulfilling his own values. And that's the second thing I want to get to, is that so she's now, that's bookended, by the way, that mention of selfishness is bookended with, at the very end of this chapter, with the scene, which a very famous line, where Rourke is the Manhattan Bank building. Yeah, Rourke is offered the Manhattan Bank building. He thinks he's gotten the commission. And they say, oh, but we just want to make some aesthetic changes on the outside, and it's, you know, put a neoclassical facade and all that. And he turns it down, even though this means he's now broke, and, you know, this is the last thing he was depending on. And the guy says to him, you know, why are you being so selfless? And he looks at him incredulously and says, that's the most selfish thing you've ever seen anybody do. So Ayn Rand is clearly, you know, it's not a, I mean, you know, she knew what she was doing here. It was not a coincidence that Keating says selfish, everybody, I'm selfish, everybody's selfish, a couple of like 10 or 20 pages before Rourke then does something which seems to somebody else from the outside observer to be selfless, and says, this is the most selfish thing. So she's really bringing up to the foreground in this section that question of what is selfishness, what is self-interest, and the connection to the fact that you have to have a self to do that. And that Keating is the one who thinks he's selfish, but is actually throwing himself away, throwing away all his personal selfish values. Whereas Rourke is the one who appears to an outside observer that he's being selfless, but is in fact clinging to the thing he actually wants the most. And that relates also to this issue of success. That's another thing that Ayn Rand sort of, the meaning of success is something she's calling into question, because you'll notice the whole progress of part one of the book. And when we get to the end of part one here, what we have is there are two things happening at the very end of this whole section. And that is that Peter Keating is being feted by his colleagues, has risen to the absolute top of the architecture profession. He's rich and famous. He is the leading architect. He is the single leading architect of the country. Everything you could possibly, you know, all these things that he's been working towards, he has achieved the greatest level of success in this sort of ordinary sense of the word that we would use. And the other thing that's happening while this is all going on is Rourke's on a train going out to Connecticut he's gone broke, he's lost his architectural practice, he's going out to Connecticut to work in a quarry. So Keating has reached the absolute height of success by conventional standards, and Rourke has reached the absolute depths of failure by conventional standards. Right. So that's very clear. Now the question is that going to continue? Is that going to be how things end? You know, because there wasn't the old saying, I think, from it's usually attributed to movie director whose name is eluding me right now, but it's if you want a happy ending, it depends on where you end the story. Right. And that is you know, if you want a happy ending for Peter Keating, you end the story
right there
at the end of part one here. But of course, we don't end the story there. It's just part one. We got 3/4 of the story left to go. So things are going to get and if you want a tragic ending for Howard Rourke, you end the story at section one. But these things are going to, you know, situations are going to not exactly reverse themselves, but the situation is going to change after this. But she's also sort of questioning what is the meaning of success, because Peter Keating is a success in all the outward superficial ways. And he's a success in terms of how everybody else looks at him from the outside. But we know, or we can sense now, that there's crucial, important things to himself personally that he's giving away. And you know, he's going to achieve this sort of outward superficial success. Everything's going to look perfect from the outside, but he's actually going to be miserable on the inside. We already have foreshadowings of that with what's going on with Katie. So, you know, I mention that because I sometimes find people who are interested in Ayn Rand's ideas, I think, especially if they've read The Fountainhead, where all the heroes are businessmen and they're, you know, and they're often very wealthy businessmen. And so they say, oh yeah, you know, Ayn Rand teaches the value of success. Well, not really, because the success, it depends what you mean by success. And that's what she's saying here, is that it's not success in that sort of outward superficial form where, okay, you made a lot of money and you're well respected by your colleagues and you're famous and you have a beautiful wife, which is what Peter's going to go for next. And, you know, you have all these things that from the outside, by other people's standards, you know, it impresses them and makes them think you're a success. But on the inside, you could have been throwing away all the things that really matter to you. Whereas, Rourke at this point is not a success in that outward sense, but he is keeping he is keeping hold of the things that are actually most important to him. Now, so that's what I would say about selfishness and success. The last thing I want to talk about is Dominique.
Oh boy.
Now, Dominique, I have to admit, is my least favorite Ayn Rand character. Least favorite good guy Ayn Rand character. There are characters in her there that are totally hateful characters that are supposed to be hateful. Dominique drives me nuts, and I'm totally with Alva Scarrett when he asks her, "Are you totally crazy?" We have this great scene there with Alva Scarrett and Dominique, and that's our first really substantial introduction to who Dominique really is. And that question, "Are you totally crazy?" There are parts. By the way, Dominique has her moments, and one of her moments is right before she's that meeting with Alva Scarrett. She's she spent 2 weeks in the slums documenting life in the slums, and then she does this great thing where she goes to some fancy party with all the wealthy people and talks to them throughout the party about the horrible conditions in the slums that these people own, and sort of throws that in their faces about how indifferent they and how indifferent and negligent they are. And then she's invited to go speak to a group of social workers, and she goes and talks to them about how slovenly and irresponsible the members of the slums are, and details all the way in which they're responsible for their own condition. So that's the part of her I like, where she has this, like, she's doing it very deliberately, that every time she finds somebody who she knows wants them to tell her what they want to hear, she goes and deliberately does the opposite of telling them what they want to hear. She tells them what they don't want to hear. I've done that a fair bit as a writer, and it can cause some problems, but I like the spirit behind it. But it ties into this thing that she finally explains to Alva Scarrett about her sort of deliberate sort of destruction of everything, that she does this not just to be cantankerous, but because she's deliberately trying to undermine any kind of success in her career, trying to undermine having her job go anywhere, or being successful, or being popular. She's deliberately, and she tells the story about the statue where she finds this perfect statue of a Greek god, and she throws it down the air shaft and shatters it so that nobody else will see it.
How does she lift it? I've always wondered that.
We don't know how big it is.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not like,
maybe it's little.
Yeah, they could be like medium sized. You never know. They in the movie they make it a miniature.
Of course. Okay.
It's like a foot high. So they solved that problem. But a specific thing here is that she says, I was it. It's the page before you have here. It would be terrible if I had a job I really wanted.
Yeah.
And that she talks about here, this is then because then I would have to depend on you. You're a wonderful person, Alva, but not exactly inspiring. And I don't think it would be beautiful to cringe before a whip in your hand. Oh, don't protest. It would be such a polite little whip, and that's what would make it uglier. And then she says, it's not you alone. If I found a job, a project, an idea, or a person I wanted, now that's foreshadowing there, I have to depend on the whole world. Everything has strings leading to everything else. We're all so tied together. We're all in a net. The net is waiting, and we're pushed into it by one single desire. You want a thing, and it's precious to you. Do you know who is standing ready to tear it out of your hands? You can't know. It may be so involved and so far away, but somebody is ready, and you're afraid of them all. And you cringe and you crawl and you beg and you accept them, just so they'll let you keep it. And look at whom you come to accept. And then she has some tart words to say about mankind in general. But what I want to get to is this motivation of hers of, if I want something, then I'm at the mercy of everybody. Now, by the way, for those who, have you guys been doing some stuff on Stoic philosophy, Shrikant?
Yep.
So you're going to recognize a whole bunch of Stoic philosophy in this, right? She is a Stoic. Who's the guy who would
No, you mean Dominique, not Ayn Rand.
Dominique is
There
not
we go.
Ayn Rand is not a Stoic.
Yeah,
She's,
I'm just making sure that was
but
clear.
Dominique is a Stoic, and I'm sure Ayn Rand had that in mind. With this idea that the Stoics said all that you can control is your own desires and emotions, and you can't control anything in the outside world. Now, who was the guy who, as Epictetus, who was a slave?
I think so. Let me just ask Joe.
Yeah, Joe gave thumbs up.
Joe's giving me a thumbs
Okay,
up. That's
very good.
Yeah. I'm not a big expert on the Stoics, but I know a little Epictetus. So he was actually a slave, and he talked about how he could his master was beating him and would break his leg, and he would face it with equanimity. And this, so it's a philosophy that comes from a time where you had these Greeks who were under the Roman thumb, and some of them in the case of Epictetus were actually enslaved, who had no control over the outside circumstances of their life. So they basically made a virtue out of that. They said, look, all you can control is your own desires and emotions and your own thoughts. And so you focus on controlling your desires and emotions and in Dominique's case, not wanting anything. And then you will therefore not be at the mercy of, your happiness will be protected, and it won't be at the mercy of outside events. And when she talks about this net and everything's dependent on everything else, and you don't know who's waiting to take it away, that's Stoicism. That's like a version of Stoicism. All right. But it has other roots as well. Ayn Rand described Dominique as she said, Dominique is me in a bad mood. And it has to do with a sense of bitterness about the world. Because, Dominique isn't a slave. She's wealthy. She's in high society. She's, wealthy and connected and has all these opportunities. But she has this incredible bitterness toward the world. And it's something that comes out occasionally in Ayn Rand's work as a sort of running theme. And I want to talk about some of the roots of that. Now, Ayn Rand was influenced, and we know she's influenced by 19th century romantic fiction. And in 19th century romantic fiction, there is this long-running fascination with the idea of the noble failure. So, for example, we've talked a lot about Victor Hugo and Les Miserables. Our kids finally discovered Les Miserables, and we just watched it over the weekend, over the last week. And the interesting thing is that Hugo sets Les Miserables in the Revolution of 1830, the French Revolution of 1832. Now, I remember I was just reading something and doing some research on this, that they say that, the 1832 revolution is hardly mentioned by anybody else. It was a minor uprising that failed almost immediately. Nobody else pays it much attention until Victor Hugo comes along in 1862 and makes it the central action of this novel. So why does he choose the revolution of 1832? Well, he chose it because it failed, right? If it succeeded, the book would turn out radically differently. He chose it because it failed, and because he was fascinated, as many 19th century romantics were. He was fascinated with the idea of the noble failure. So you have to have Enjolras and the young revolutionaries who are these, totally committed idealists, and they can't be totally committed idealists who fight a revolution and win.
No.
They have to be totally committed idealists who fight a revolution and all get killed. So this, and another example of this is Edmond Rostand, who wrote Cyrano de Bergerac. And Cyrano de Bergerac is another example of the sort of the noble failure. He's this swordsman and dashing heroic figure, and a poet and a playwright and a man of genius, but he fails at everything in life. He never wins fame. He never gets the girl, and he ends up getting killed at the end. So that was Rostand went on to write another play called Chanticleer. It has a very similar theme where the hero is a rooster. It's sort of a little fantastical thing, sort of Disney-fied kind of. We're going to have the hero be an anthropomorphized animal. But he's a hero. He's a rooster who believes that his crowing in the morning is what causes the sun to rise, and it has that same sort of noble failure that at the end he fails in his ambitions, but he does so nobly. And so Hugo's writing in the Les Miserables in 1862, Cyrano de Bergerac is 1897, Chanticleer is 1910. Right, so this is all not very long before Ayn Rand's working on The Fountainhead. So you see these influences of the 19th century fascination with the hero who is too good for this rotten world. And so you can see that's another strain that she's drawing from in creating the Dominique Franklin character and in Dominique Franklin's outlook on life, because she sees Rourke as another, a hero who's too good for this rotten world. Now, this is not coming from Ayn Rand's premises, because Hugo and these other people tend to come from a sort of Platonic idealism, where the ideal is always too good for this world because the ideal is taken from another world, is taken from some spiritual conception of a higher realm. Hugo was a Christian and all of that, and a Christian and a socialist, which gives you two ideals that are not based on reality. So this Platonic version of idealism, but the ideal is taken from another realm, from not from this world, from some higher spiritual plane, and therefore is inherently doomed because the ideal does not come from this world. Now, she's Aristotelian. Her ideal has to be something that comes from and belongs in this world. So she's going to undermine that, but you can see how that romantic tradition is coming out in Dominique. So this is all my attempt, because like I said, she's my least favorite character, but I'm trying to understand where she's coming from and what the roots are. Then the last thing I want to mention is I think this also has some Russian roots, because the huge theme of Russian 19th century literature and also among the intellectuals is this sense of bitterness towards the world. And it has partly to do with the fact that so Russia had in 1825 that a revolution, a short and doomed revolution that was started by a group they referred to later as the Decemberists, because this happened in December of 1825. Now, I know in recent years there's been a rock group called the Decemberists, which, as far as I can tell, has very little relationship with this. But the Russian Decemberists, these guys in 1825, were basically Western influenced liberals. Then they wanted a freer society, a freer system of government in Russia. They wanted reforms that would have free speech and some degree of voting by the people. They were Western style liberals who were demanding a more liberal system for Russia, and they were ruthlessly and brutally suppressed in 1825. And so after that, among the Russian sort of intellectual elites, these people who are educated and engaged with Western and influenced by Western Enlightenment ideas, there's this tremendous bitterness, this idea that we want a better system, we want a more liberal system, but the average Russian is indifferent and doesn't care. And if we rise up, they won't lift a finger to help us. And so that sense of bitterness toward the world is part of the Russian context that she's coming from. And even Lenin ends up exploiting this, because he writes in 1902 he writes a pamphlet called "What Is to Be Done," and it's actually based on the title of an earlier novel from 1863, I think, or about the time this live is an earlier Russian novel, and it's sort of tapping into this long intellectual tradition of this bitterness towards the common man and towards the average Russian. And his answer to what is to be done, Lenin's answer, is to say, well, the people aren't going to rise up. They haven't developed the proper revolutionary consciousness. So we need to have a revolutionary vanguard of coffeehouse intellectuals who will manipulate them and propagandize them and seize political power and exercise it on their behalf, and then force them into having a revolutionary consciousness. So it's this idea of, again, this idea of the intellectuals versus the people, even while the communists under Lenin are pretending to act on behalf of the people. But they do it in this sort of way that they're actually bitter towards the people. They believe the people will not rise up on their own. And so that's all part of this Russian context of bitterness towards the common man. And I think you can see Ayn Rand bringing that with her a little bit. So one of her early unpublished works, it's not really a finished work, is notes she had toward either a play or a book she was going to do called The Little Street. And it's about the little street is this little neighborhood, this little side street, and all the people living around the side street. And they're all petty and anti-intellectual and small-minded. And it's basically about how terrible it's about how terrible the common man is, basically, is the theme that she was working on with The Little Street. And I remember reading these notes and thinking, that sounds like something that comes out of Russia, right? Because it's about the Russian common man. It's about the lumpen proletariat, the people who are just irredeemably spiritually lost, and how terrible they are, and how they all hate and resent any better man who rises up. Now, she kind of abandoned that project. And then what you could see in her work is her attitudes, the more time she's in America, I think, her attitude towards the common man begins to change. And part of the change we're seeing, which is in this first section of the novel, is the character of Mike. There's a lot more Mikes that start showing up in her novels at this point. Or the fact that, when Rourke's at the Heller house, it's talking about how he doesn't get along with the contractor, but he gets along with all the workers on the site, right? So it's this idea of so she begins to have this greater acceptance of the American common man as being better, more honest, and losing some of that Russian bitterness. But she keeps all the Russian bitterness and she puts it into the character of Dominique. And I think that's part of sort of what helps explain a character who otherwise drives me nuts. Now, I'd also say that, Dominique is the antipode to Ayn Rand's other great female hero, which is Dagny Taggart in Atlas Shrugged. So she's sort of, you think of those two as antipodes, that Dagny Taggart is the one who is not consumed by bitterness. And, she's the Howard Rourke. She's the female version of Howard Rourke, out there doing her work in her way and not being embittered by or letting the world make her bitter about her prospects, which I think is kind of an interesting comparison, which we'll go into another time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rob. And really like the Russian piece and the Platonic piece. Next up is going to be Maritza, followed by Sherri. Maritza.
So since Rob is ending on the topic of Dominique, I'm going to start with Dominique. I'm restructuring what I was going to say. I would like to actually present this to you in a very subjective manner. Odd, I know, right? Usually we're trying for objectivity when speaking of Ayn Rand. But I'm going to be a little subjective here. I am going to try to show you Dominique in a different light. Dominique in the light in which I took her the very first time I read this book. So what I saw and what I'm asking you to see, this is a person born of wealth and privilege. She has never wanted or needed for anything. In addition to being financially secure, in good physical and societal standing, she also has this ethereal beauty that is recognizable by most and all. But her mind, her thoughts, her very inner core resembles no one and nothing around her. So I am one of 12 children. I'm the only left-handed person. I have so many cousins that I can't even tell you how many cousins I have. Nobody in my family is left-handed. I'm the only left-handed person. So not a one of them understands the struggle. That's what I see in Dominique. I see this person surrounded, and everywhere she looks, nobody looks like her inside. There is no one who thinks like she thinks. So she is filled with this despair that she converts to ennui because she finds herself out of sorts with the world. And now when I first read this book, I was in my late teens. By then, I was already orphaned. I was already on my own. Life for me had not been that hard, and I certainly was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I mean, life had not been so easy, I'm sorry. And when I read the passage, I was gonna start to you guys with the passage that Rob read. And I won't read the whole thing out for you again, but it's the one where she says, if I found a job, a project, an idea, or a person I wanted, I have to depend on the whole world. That seems overly dramatic unless you put yourself in the frame of mind of someone who looks around and sees no one like them. These people are so alien to you that you would rather chew off your arm than depend on them for anything. You cannot fathom these people for whom you have zero respect being people to whom you could possibly be beholden. I can empathize with that on such a level that I didn't find her to be as distasteful as I objectively understood most would, because I can see why she is distasteful. But on a subjective side, I can find empathy because I understand that. I am a very objective soul. I'm logical, I'm rational. I really like to take 2 steps away from my emotions and dissect them and have discussions. It doesn't go over well with most people in general. And in the culture in which I was raised, it doesn't. I was raised in a culture that is, they are emotional first. It's a very chaperone society. It's almost, it's very, very hard to start with the I first in the society in which I was raised. And there's good to that. I have learned to embrace that and love it in its own way. As a child, it was much harder because I wanted logic and I kept getting beat over the head with absolute subjectivity that made no sense to me. So I can see that in this character. I see somebody who has this despair of alienness that's so deep that her self-preservation mechanism has been, I'm going to care for nothing. I'm going to want for nothing. That way, nothing can hurt me. If I don't want it, it can't hurt me. The way that she describes that to me is just beautiful. If you want a thing and it's precious to you, and now everybody owns you, it's the, if you guys are television watchers, I don't watch enough TV for any movie to come to mind, but it's a constant theme, this idea of, when you have the people who are doing crime, who do they go after? Anything that you love. So the real, the super, super badass good guy, he wants nothing and has no one. Why? Because he doesn't want liabilities or collateral damage or weaknesses. And that's basically what she's doing. She's making sure that that nothing can be used against her. And that's the way I see her. Dominique, to me, in this book also, is the one character who experiences the most growth. And if we can put ourselves in her shoes, I think there's so much to learn there. If you walk through this book with Dominique, see something of her in yourself and see it as it changes. You could probably find either a moment of yourself in your earlier life where you also experienced a similar growth, or you will find a desire for something you see in yourself to follow this growth path. So I will pick up the banner for Dominique and I will put myself in Dominique's fan club just because I can see it. She's got a pessimistic worldview when we meet her here. These 5 chapters are our first real look into the world of Dominique. And she seems almost bipolar. I mean, let's be honest. She seems very, very much like random. But everything she does is so deliberate. It's brilliantly deliberate. She is, when you hear her speech, it's the first time you realize she's not doing anything coldly. She is doing it all very purposefully and very much. And something that needs said here is that, for all of her perhaps misguided pessimism, she's a very independent character that we're seeing. She is someone who is not evading. Now, the manner in which she's choosing to engage with the world is very odd, especially to most of us, right? But she's engaging. She's not floating. She's not allowing herself to be bounced around like Peter Keating. She's also not, so Howard Roark follows his inner core with zero thought to anyone else. He doesn't have to deflect because he doesn't have that constant empathy that I see in Dominique. Dominique sees the possibility that the world has to hurt her and anything that is of value. She sees what the ideal could be. And she mourns the fact that she meets it nowhere that her eye turns. We're going to get further into that as the book progresses, but that's a key here. This is somebody who feels super alien, and she really is desperate to see something worth believing in. But at the same time, she's A, convinced nothing out there exists, and B, even more convinced that she never wants to find it. Because her, like, even something else that's said in this thing is that, you know, they're told you shouldn't be that passionate about anything. No one should be that passionate. I disagree. I see she holds herself in such reserve because she can't. A poet. I don't know if any of you guys write poetry. Writing poetry is scary sometimes because it's like your heart vomit on a page. And it's so emotional and sober. And I'm not talking about when you're in a good mood and, you know, you're trying to write in a specific pentameter. I'm talking when you sit down and you're furiously scribbling and you don't even know what you're writing until it's done. How often do you take that, read it, throw it into the fire? Why? Because it's so raw that you just cannot bear for anyone to see it. And I believe that that's the way that this character, Dominique, walks through life. So we're gonna move forward and we'll go, and I'm gonna, like I said, I'm picking up the fan title for Dominique, and we'll go through, and hopefully I'll bring some of you to my corner as we move along. Wait, what's the cool saying? I don't know enough about TV. Is it, if I say Team Dominique, is that a thing? Do people know what that means? Sorry. Anyway, I don't know. Okay, I'm gonna move on. The other thing I want to talk about, Rob also spoke about, so I'm not going to talk about it as much, but selfishness. So Ayn Rand actually has an entire thing on, I believe it's an essay, a group of essay papers called The Virtue of Selfishness. I do want to bring that up a little bit, and I'm going to read just a little bit from that, from those essays, just because I think it's so vital at this point in the book to understand that when we speak of selfishness in this forum, we are talking about Ayn Rand's definition of selfishness, not the common one. So this is from AynRand.org. It's a little background on her essay, The Virtue of Selfishness. Selfishness, a virtue? Ayn Rand chose this book's provocative title because she was on a mission to overcome centuries of demonization. In popular usage, Rand writes, the word selfishness is a synonym of evil. The image it conjures is of a murderous brute who tramples over piles of corpses to achieve his own ends and pursues nothing but the gratification of the mindless whims of any immediate moment. Yet, the exact meaning and dictionary definition of the word selfishness is concern with one's own interests. This concept does not include a moral evaluation. It does not tell us whether concern with one's own interests is good or evil, nor does it tell us what constitutes man's actual interest. It is the task of ethics to answer such questions. So the thing here is that this is vital throughout the book here. You know, it's commonly believed that morality depends on, like, you know, that morality demands that we choose between sacrificing other people to ourselves and sacrificing our own values to satisfy others' needs. But Ayn Rand rejects both of those. She rejects both forms of that selfishness, and she offers a new concept for us. And it's an ethics of rational selfishness that rejects sacrifice in all its forms. So basically what we're seeing here is the idea of Howard work. In these 5 chapters, it's heartbreaking to watch him go from opening his own office to having to go work at a quarry. And we see that in these 5 little chapters, but the dignity with which it's done is impressive. And I don't know about the rest of you, but in his place, I'm not sure I would have that kind of power. I would like to think that I do, but if I'm being absolutely honest with myself, I'm not convinced. Because, I mean, to have $14 in your pocket, which they didn't say, but I mean, he had to pay for the taxi to get to the office. And then to stand there when you have nothing and to walk away because you cannot sacrifice the integrity of your project is so, that to me, that's definitely the ideal. I hope one day when I grow up, I can be almost at that level. That's the image I'm left with when I see Howard work. Howard work is definitely an ideal. I don't view him as an actual real person, but the beauty about ideals is if we shoot for them and we don't make it, we land still a little bit more than we would have if you hadn't tried, right? So that's what I see there. And it's it's even more striking when you see it with the opposite of Keating. Keating is reaching stratospheric levels here. But you know what he gets out of it? He gets more and more confused and more lost. He had what he wanted. He had Katie. But I want to talk for just a little bit about two scenes about Keating and Katie. So Rob brought up the part where, you know, Keating's mother is talking, and they're talking about selfish versus selflessness. The thing about it there is that after he spent all night with his mother talking in his ear, he sat down, and the only thing he really wished was that the decision would be taken from him. He did not want to make this decision. The really sad part is that neither did Katie. When he went, so the Ayn Rand gives us both of their perspectives that morning when he went to her house. She gives us both of theirs. Both of them are praying fervently with everything inside of themselves that the other will force them to take action. They're each praying for that, but neither of them takes action. And what do we see? All is lost. I was so baffled, and I'm still a little baffled even reading it. And I've read this countless times, right? But reading it again, I still find myself baffled how it was that on one page, he's ready to marry Katie, and he doesn't really like Dominique, but then he's professing his undying love to Dominique, and like he's going to wait on her eternally to marry her as soon as she says so. I just couldn't, it still doesn't make sense to me, even however many times I've read it, right? The lack of conviction, my mind, what helps me now, because I've read it, this is a spoiler, and because I love saying this phrase and I say it all the time, in order to say I love you, first, one must acknowledge the I. You have to know how to say I before you can say I love you. This is why Peter Keating didn't truly know what love is. He thought himself in love with Katie. Emotionally, he had a feeling, but because he could not acknowledge the I, and I said this to you guys a few meetings back, I see neither he nor Katie have a self. They are examples of what happens when we allow ourselves to drift and we allow everyone else's opinions to shape us. We end up without an I. And because of that, to me, I view that can be the only way in which he can supposedly love this person and then be like willing to sacrifice it all. Because really, the appeal of Dominique was just for the possibility of a career boost, but also because she was something unattainable. Everyone thought Peter Keating was great and wonderful. Dominique did not. And because of that, he wanted to conquer Dominique. And that's really ugly facet of a self. But this is somebody who has no self. So then you wonder, can you view that as an ugly facet of theirs? Or do you view it as he needed her approval because he needs everyone's approval? He could not live in a world where there was someone in his orbit whose approval he couldn't have. And we see when he gets his partnership and he goes to Rourke's office, he goes there all kinds of confident because now he thinks he's reached a level of success that finally puts him above Rourke. His inner self, which, his inner being, as it were, because he's not sure of himself, right? His inner being understood something he does not. The reason he felt uneasy in Rourke's presence had nothing to do with the success level. nothing to do with the talent level, and everything to do with the integrity. In that last encounter, for those of you who didn't get a chance to read the chapters, what happens in that encounter is that Peter Keating seeks to bribe Rourke to not tell anyone that he helped him with the I always say it wrong. I'm just going to say the competition for the building that he won. Rourke helped him. So he offers Rourke a check. And he's saying, oh, it's to help you out for helping me. Well, Rourke has no money in the bank.
Okay, I think Maritza is having a problem. She will come back. Let's see here. Give me just a second. I think she will leave and come back. All right. Oh, what I want to do is while she comes back, I want to comment on the comments she made on Dominique. I think those were brilliant, this is brilliant observations. So firstly, I want to say is that this is work of fiction, and plot is key to that. Let me see, is Maritza back?
Sorry about that. Yes,
No
I am. Can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yes,
I
go ahead.
just switched. I just switched internets. Sorry about that. I just switched to my hotspot.
Go ahead. I was just speaking behind your back, saying that you had brilliant observations. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, guys. So right. So Rourke gives him and tells him, this is my bribe to you to never tell anyone that I helped you, because I don't want anyone to have any clue that I helped with this. In that moment, Peter Keating sees something about himself that he finds to be super ugly. But he realizes also that he hates Rourke. He decides in that moment that he hates Rourke. And the reason being is because and this is my personal opinion, is that that's the moment when Keating realizes that what he's been seeing in Rourke that makes him uneasy is that shining flame of integrity, which is lacking in Peter Keating himself. So he walks away from that meeting, all kinds of shook up, and he decides that he hates Rourke. And I think that that moment is Keating. He hits the highest. We're going to see as the chapters progress, he's going to start his demise, right? It's not immediate, but I think that when he decided that, he saw something ugly in himself that he pushed off. He drank himself to oblivion, right? When he precipitated the death of the partner, he saw in himself a lot of characteristics he didn't like, and he chose to evade. And I get really caught up on this concept of, are we grabbing our lives and walking forward with it? Or are we floating? Are we evading? And I actually think I got the concepts from, I think it's from Objectivism and from Ayn Rand herself. It's softer in this book, but you see it in these characters, as we see them developing. And as Rob said, Katie has this, this vision, and it's accurate. She's dead on, she's spot on. But again, I said I find her to be she's the least likable character to me, right? But she's so disappointing because she saw that and she did nothing with it. So as I've asked you before, let's take a minute, put ourselves in her shoes. When in our lives have we seen something with clarity, and then the next day convinced ourselves it was shadows in the dark, there were nothing? And then you fast forward 5-10 years and you go, where would I have been if I had not ignored that 10 years ago? She's that cautionary tale of just, closing our eyes and remaining blind to something that has already struck us with a clarity that's terrifying. And I think we all have those moments. So, I'm really enjoying looking at this book from a perspective of each character and what are they saying about me and humanity in general. And so I'm going to keep working that off on top of you guys. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. So I want to comment on your observations on Dominique. So firstly, that's excellent observations. One thing I want to say, that this is a work of fiction, and the way fiction works is through plot. So there are actually, and the way in which both Hugo and Ayn Rand construct plots is that there is a plot which is something happening in the outside world, and there is a plot of something that is happening inside. So if you look at the entire story of success or failure of Howard Roark in his profession, that is what is happening outside. The entire plot of what is happening inside is happening inside the consciousness of Dominique, because all the other characters are just, they fundamentally, they don't change. They get their comeuppance, but they don't, fundamentally, they don't change. So the entire plot inside is happening in Dominique. So what is that plot? It is essentially the vertical and the horizontal I was talking about. It's a ability, the first-handedness, which is your capacity to say I, capacity to face reality directly and come up with your own judgments about that. That is the first-handedness, which is a vertical axis. And then there is a horizontal axis, which what Ayn Rand calls second-handedness, where you are just reacting to things, okay? So if you want to look at Dominique in the beginning, she loves first-handedness. She's always loved it. She's seen only the second-handedness around her, hates it, doesn't want to have anything to do with it, but does see that, it is Russian in the sense that she's saying there are only mostly second-handed people, and it is Platonic in the sense that the vertical axis is separate from the horizontal axis. You can either, so it's not, so that's her position. Then you have got Keating, who has only the horizontal axis. You have Toohey, who has the horizontal axis, knows the vertical axis and wants to destroy it. Then you have the Winan, who has a very real first-handed thing, but he thinks that the only way to have that is to enslave and to, kind of transform, kind of work with all the horizontal people and get them to actually support you. So it's kind of moving it in the opposite direction. And Howard Roark has both. He has the first-handedness, which actually transforms existence, the physical surrounding, which and so what Ayn Rand, what Dominique learns is about the power of the vertical axis, the first-handedness, on the second-handed, on the world as such. That's what she has to learn over time. So that was fantastic, fantastic observation. Thank you. Next up is going to be Sherri, followed by Rupali and Iris.
Okay, but Rob is hijacking for a second.
No, I just wanted to make a note that I'm really glad, Maritza, that there's somebody taking on the Dominique cause and being on Team Dominique, because that's what the great thing about this diversity is. You get somebody who will make the case for Dominique to us Dominique skeptics.
Yeah, you need conflict in these, to have a very dramatic presentation on a dramatic work. It works very well.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to thank Maritza too, because you've perfectly set up the sorts of things that I wanted to talk about. I like to always bring in the architectural history, but I also like to bring in that aesthetic side of things. Because many of the people on this group were reading about this time last year, Ayn Rand's book, The Romantic Manifesto. I like to link things we learned from that book on how to evaluate a work of art and use it while we're reading this. So what Maritza was talking about, what Rob, I was expecting Rob to talk about, because he and I were talking about this the other day, and has been in my notes as we've been reading along. And I'd love for you guys to start put the seed in your head so that as you continue reading, you start noticing these things yourself, which is notice how often for certain characters, their sense of life is sending them up warnings, good or bad sometimes, but in most of the cases, like if we have Keating and with Peter and Katie, especially the whole shadow on the wall, all these scenes, these are a deep emotional sense of life reaction to something. And these characters shut that down. They don't listen to their sense of life. And it's sending up clanging bells and they totally ignore it. We'll start seeing that sort of thing happen on the other side. We start seeing that as other characters, as we start moving into the next section, we'll start seeing more sense of life reactions and notice how characters respond to them, whether they listen to and act on that sense of life reaction, or whether they ignore it. And it's really interesting to watch that part of it. So I'm just going to plant that little seed. One of the other things that I always like to point out is, and maybe we're going to start calling this minding the details. In architectural history, it would have been called God is in the details, but I'm an atheist, so not God we'll just call it minding the details. So I like to point out little details that, again, from the Romantic Manifesto, we understand Ayn Rand's method in her aesthetic philosophy, that you're working with a work of art. In this case, it's a piece of fiction. It starts with nothing, a blank sheet of white paper, because not a computer screen, because she typed, or hand wrote parts of it at first. If it's a painter, it's a blank canvas. If it's an architect, it's a blank site. So you start with nothing. So the details that you add are important. Every last one of them is important. So I want to do a little, I want to take a look at several different offices. We get descriptions of people's offices. And in the very beginning of this, we get Rourke's office. So I'll end with that one. We're going to jump back to a few other offices. And I want to point out the details how rich these details are and what each one of these details is really adding to the characterization and to the plot. So we start here on page 20 in the dean's office, and it's described like this. The dean's office looked like a chapel, a pool of twilight, of dreamy twilight, fed by one tall window of stained glass. The twilight flowed in through the garments of stiff saints, their arms contorted at the elbows. A red spot of light and a purple one rested respectively on two genuine gargoyles squatting at the corners of the fireplace that had never been used. We'll get to fireplaces later on, but just keep that in mind. A green spot stood in the center of a picture of the Parthenon suspended over that fireplace. And then later on we get, when Rourke enters the office, the outline of the dean's figure swim dimly, probably because of light from that single window, behind his desk. And he describes the desk. The desk was carved like a confessional. So let's contrast that to Franken's office. So Keating gets the job and goes to visit Guy Franken. The first day he's there with the drawings. And this is how Franken's office is described. Guy Franken's office was polished. No, thought Keating, not polished, but shellacked. No, not shellacked, but liquid with mirrors melted and poured over every object. He saw splinters of his own reflection let loose like a swarm of butterflies follow him across the room. I mean, gosh, what? You can tell she was steeped in movies, the visual level of detail that comes out when she describes, you can see this in your mind's eye you can see this image. So then it goes on, following him across the room on the Chippendale cabinets, on the Jacobean chairs, on the Louis XV mantelpiece. He had time to note a genuine Roman statue in the corner, sepia photographs of the Parthenon, of Reims Cathedral, of Versailles, and of the Frink National Bank building with the eternal torch. He saw his own legs approaching him in the side of the massive mahogany desk. But then on the next page, we get this lovely little detail. Keating and Franken are talking. Keating comes up with a phrase. Franken wants to write it down because he wants to use that phrase for later. So we have this. He made Keating repeat it and wrote it down on a pad, picking a pencil from an array before him, new, many-colored pencils, sharpened to a professional needlepoint, ready, unused. I love that line. Then we have Cameron's office. Now, you've got the dean's office first, this dark historical replica. You've got Franken's office that's just all about really self-reflection. There's an important detail there. It's about the mirror coming back at you. It's about that image of yourself being reflected, but it's like a fun house. Then you get Cameron's office. Now, remember, this is not Cameron's office at the height of his career. This is Cameron's office when Rourke first comes to see him. So we have this, page 47. Henry Cameron sat on his desk at the end of a long, bare room. He sat bent forward, his arms on the desk, his two hands closed before him. And there's a description of himself. Rourke stood on the threshold and they looked at each other across the long room. The light from the air shaft was gray, and the dust on the drafting table and on the few green files looked like fuzzy crystals deposited by the light. But on the wall between the windows, Rourke saw a picture. It was the only picture in the room. It was the drawing of a skyscraper that had never been erected. So notice these details. She's describing the dust, that here he is spending a lot of his time now waiting for the commissions that once used to pour in. So I love this description of fuzzy crystals of deposited, the dust looked like fuzzy crystals deposited by the light. I think that's a really unique description. I mean, I would never have thought of describing light like a crystal, but I think there's a reason that she's putting in this sharp crystal imagery in our heads. I think it's to show us that this isn't dusty, old, decaying, and never any spark there. That crystal is, I think, an important detail. Then we get on to Rourke's office. And notice what's there. We don't hear yet about Keating's office because he hasn't set up his office. We hear plenty about his house, and I'll get to a little detail of that in a moment here. But I love this detail of Rourke's office when he first opens it up. It was one large room on the top of an old building with a broad window high over the roof. He could see the distant band of the Hudson at his windowsill, with a small streak of ships underneath his fingertips when he pressed them to the glass. He had a desk, 2 chairs, and a huge drafting table. The glass entrance door bore the words, Howard Rourke, architect. He stood in the hall for a long time looking at the words. Then he went in and slammed the door, picked up a T-square from his table, flung it down again, as if throwing an anchor. And I just love that detail. So I think that when we're reading these, it's really important to pay attention to the tiniest little details. Every one of them was added there very much on purpose and has many levels of meaning. These descriptions of the offices aren't just, that's what she thought of. Each one of them is telling us a little bit more about that character and about where that character is in their arc of the story. And so one other little detail that I wanted to pull out here that really struck me as funny. We talked a little bit about the fireplace at the dean's office that has never been used. Well, we get another fireplace in this scene in page 148. This is in Peter's house. This is when his mother has moved up by then. So he's at that level of success. And this is the night that Katie shows up after her big scare with the shadow on the wall, or her sense of life scare that she starts to react, and then she decides not to react to that. So when we get, let's see, at the bottom of page 48, we get this description of his apartment. Keating sat on the floor by the imitation logs in the fireplace of his living room. The imitation logs. Did anybody catch that when they read it? The imitation logs. So we're in like 1924. Imitation logs. I mean, it's not like 2020 where imitation logs can look all the world like a real fire, except for they don't have that crackle and pop, and that doesn't smell like smoke. Imitation logs from the 1920s look really fake. But if you missed that imitation logs, wait for this little delicious tidbit that comes the very next page. Is it the next page? Yes. Okay. So Katie comes in and she's panicked and flustered and shaking. And Peter says, "Take your coat off. Come here. Get yourself warm by the fire." I put the book down. I didn't notice this the first times, the many other times that I read this, but this time reading through it, I read that line, having just remembered imitation logs was in my head. Funny, imitation logs from the 1920s. How cheesy would that be? And then turn the page and hear "warm yourself by the fire." I had to put the book down and laugh because that's really funny. So, but it makes, but not only is it really funny, look at what it says. Look at what he's trying to warm her by the fire, but he has nothing of real warmth to give. It's empty. It's false. There's so much added level of detail that comes from these little tiny details, these little nuggets scattered through the whole book. So that's my mind the details section for today. The architectural history section I wanted to talk about here is the Cosmoslotnik building competition. And not yet, don't share screen yet. So we have this described here in chapter 14. And it comes as this big, grandiose building competition. Now, in architectural world, building competitions are common. They were always common. And most of them had some level of prize, but nothing like what this one is. This one's described as massive and grandiose. Then came the competition for the Cosmoslotnik building. Cosmoslotnik, that's hard to say, Pictures of Hollywood, California, had decided to erect a stupendous home office in New York, a skyscraper to house a motion picture theater and 40 floors of offices. A worldwide competition for selection of an architect had been announced a year in advance. It was stated that the Cosmoslotnik were not merely the leaders in the art of the motion picture, but they embraced all the arts, since all contributed to the creation of films and architecture being a lofty, though neglected branch of aesthetics, Kosmoslotnik were ready to put it on the map. So then we get this description about the publicity of this Kosmoslotnik competition. We hear that it's because it's a Hollywood movie place, right? They're the ones who are building. I don't know why a Hollywood movie production would have their home office in New York, but I don't know the movie industry. So, but he gets into details about how came in the news, in the newspapers, in the press for this competition. They would take stories about the Parthenon and the Pantheon, and they would put their their casting calls from their actresses and put them in with it. So there was this combination of their advertising for their films and the advertising for their competition joined together. And they're talking about here that they wanted this building to symbolize the genius of modern technology and the spirit of the American people. And they announced at the very beginning, before the competition started, they announced this as, quote, the most beautiful building in the world, unquote. Now, I'd like to talk always about what's real and in architectural history from the Fountainhead and what's not. And this one has a very, very clear point of reference. So let's share. Rob, you want to pull that up? No. So we have in 1924, the Chicago Tribune, I think it's 24. Do I have the right year?
Sounds right.
22. In 1922, the Chicago Tribune was turning 75 years old. And they placed this ad in the above the fold left-hand side of their newspaper. Now, I don't think I need to explain above the fold, but I think if we've got kids like our kids' age and younger, we'd probably have to explain what above the fold meant in press. But this was a huge, huge splash to put something in that prime position. And then on top of it, notice the prize money. This is 1922, $100,000 prize. Now, yes, competitions were common. There was never a prize like this. So the other thing I want to point out here is how much the advertising continued on in a very similar way. You can tell here, I have to pull up the picture because I can't read that picture. You probably can't see it either, but I've got it from a book here that I can also read it for you. So this section in the middle where there's dashes and there's descriptions here, this is what they are in their first announcement of this competition. The Tribune Tower or the Tribune describes this as what they're looking for. They want to adorn with a monument of enduring beauty this city in which the Tribune has prospered so amazingly. It's to create a structure which will be an inspiration and a model for generations of newspaper publishers, and to provide a new and beautiful home worthy of the world's greatest newspaper. So they were really touting this in the highest level. They also did, this is the beginning of marketing campaigns that are more recognizable for what we would know today. And they did link stories from, you remember last week or the week before, we talked about how the newspapers authors would go off to some building and take a stone from, the press office in Paris and bring it back. That sort of thing was one of their tie-ins. They also did stuff like this. This was another one of their advertising. And they're talking about, can the genius of Greece contribute to the Tribune's new building? So remember, they had a full year to advertise and they just went all out. So this particular ad, let me see if I've got the page, I can pull it up. because I know you can't read it. It doesn't come through. While Pericles was head of the Athenian democracy, the Parthenon was built in honor of Athena Parthenos.
Athena Parthenos.
There we go. Sorry. Wow, this is little. The protective divinity of Athens. For 20 years, the quarries of Attica were plumbed for their most beautiful marbles, and these great blocks were joined and adjusted without cement. The sculptor, Phidias, who was counsel of Pericles in matters relating to the embellishment of Athens, superintended and directed the artists and workmen who built the temple. To his unerring judgment is due the perfection of proportion of the Parthenon, the height and thickness of the columns, the pediments, and other proportions of the temple, which harmonize to give the impression of perfect symmetry. And then the very bottom section here, it says, though science has brought us new and better methods of construction since the days of the Parthenon, for sheer architectural beauty, that old temple has never been surpassed. The Tribune hopes to build the most beautiful modern building in the world. Best known architects are competing for the Tribune's $100,000 prize. Doubtless, many of them will seek suggestions for the Tribune's new home in the calm, serene strength of the temples of the ancients. So you can see they're doing the same kind of thing, but they also took it in every other method that they could. They tried to advertise and bring attention at every single level they could. So in this particular bit, they reached out to the individuals of the reading press and asked them for their suggestions. And we have suggestions like a pyramid. One reader writes, last night I dreamed that I was designing the new Tribune building. It took the form of a huge pyramid, a marvelous structure of blue marble. The windows and doors were the same pyramid shape. And then somebody from Oak Park wrote, and these are just, you know, these are essentially letters to the editor. Anybody, please send us your suggestions. A bell. By all means, have a tower and don't forget to have a big, deep toned bell in it. Not a dinky little one either. An obelisk. So somebody from Chicago says, last year, let your aim be ruggedness, not nicety. I suggest this type for your building, rugged simplicity, obelisk type. Someone from Toledo, Ohio says a clock. One of the big features to me is an immense clock in the tower, which at its height can be seen for miles away. And then in the bottom left, this may look totally strange to you, this weird T shape. The bottom left, an electric T. This is somebody from Danville, Illinois. One of the features of the Tribune's new building should be a beacon light, a large electric T. So
You gotta read this one.
this one here, okay. So this
Lower
is Dubuque, Iowa. Somebody thinks it should be the Eiffel Tower. I cannot think of anything more appropriate for your building than the Eiffel Tower style.
You notice they have this thing with the Eiffel Tower all filled in with offices.
Yep, yeah. So they went to this extent. They asked their readers, I mean, come on, they had a year to really play with this, and they wrung every last bit of marketing they could out of it. They even got to the point where this was the time when comics and political cartoons were starting to happen. There's plenty of political cartoons to have in Chicago at this point, of course. So this one, you probably can't read it, but the sign in the lower right here says, our neighbors, the Kirk Company or Kirk Soapworks. So, and you notice there, this is the building as a man with a clothespin on his nose because they're making soap on Water Street nearby. And of course, making soap is kind of smelly. So this is somebody else's political cartoon. We also have this one, which I'm not quite sure what Robbie the robot here with his clock tower has, but you notice he's got clocks for his ears. So they were having a really good time with this. And I think we need to stop share. Can you stop share? They had, there's a book in particular, if you want to dig, I'm going to be getting into this many more times. Oh, wait, actually we have more. We have pictures of the,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, but let me just show you the book that I recommend if you're really interested in the Tribune Tower competition is called The Chicago Tribune Tower Competition, Skyscraper Design and Cultural Change in the 1920s. And it's by Catherine Solomonson. And that, I think I now have maybe 3. How many times have I bought this book?
We almost bought it a third time.
Yeah, we didn't. We only bought it twice.
We accidentally bought it twice.
Anyway, it's a very detailed, full of footnotes, gives a really great story. But I wanted to show you some of the winning competition and some of the rest of them, some of the rest of the designs.
Should I go?
Yep. So this is, and it gives you a little sense of what this tower looked like at the time it was built, because I like to show you, I think before I showed you a more recent picture of the Tribune Tower, I wanted to show you what it looked like in its original setting. So it was very much the lone tower on North Michigan Avenue at the time. You see over here on the left side, this white building right on the edge that you see, that's the Wrigley building. So you can see this big corporate structures at the time making these big statements. And that's another thing that the Tribune Tower was really after. They were trying very much to make a statement for what was American capitalism at this time. What I find fascinating, and we'll talk about all of these pictures, and there's a much greater detail somewhere else I'll write about this, but just so you guys get a sense, what this was the winning design. It was really, they knew what they wanted, even though they spent a year to solicit designs from international, all across the world. They had 263 or something designs that were submitted. They kind of knew what they wanted from the get-go, and they didn't tell anybody that. But if you read Catherine's book, you get into the detail. It was really a plan from the beginning. Not that they had a specific architect and a specific design they wanted, but they knew the direction they wanted. Even so, this was all really a whole big to-do, knowing that what they were going to get at the end. But you'll notice that the Chicago Tribune at the time, they were known for their super efficient methods of printing presses and their very modern corporate efficiencies in the way that they did their business. But they choose, and there's a line here from Catherine's book that I just love. The Chicago Tribune, which publicly prided itself on its technological advances, its efficient business practice, its roles in promoting Chicago, and its ardent patriotism, favored a Gothic tower by New York architects who based their designs on medieval French and Belgian prototypes when there were so many other options. So I'm going to show you a few of the other options. And there's a book you can see, there's a 1984, I believe, they modern 1980s architects decided they were going to redo the competition, and they did their own designs. So you can get this in the original from 1924, or you can get some of these in the newer ones. So here on the left is the second place winner, and it's Eliel Saarinen design. And at this point in time when competitions were happening, it was very usually that you didn't want actually to win first place. I mean, yeah, the prize money would be great, but honestly, everybody wanted to get second place, because second place was always the really impressive design that had a lot of impact in how designs were done from that point forward. But it was just too much for them to award first place. So Second place in an architectural competition is sort of the hidden first place. It's the hidden prize. So I'm not going to show you the one on the right is another one. I don't have the name of the individuals of all of these, but I just want to show you a few of the others. You'll see some here. These are more third place winners. These are some international designs. And one I want to give a little tidbit here. This building on the left, this column, skyscraper column, this was one of my tidbits of how I found out that I knew Ayn Rand was referring to this particular competition, because in the archives, there's a tracing from her documents of this building. It's not a sketch of the building. She put a piece of thin paper on top of it and drew around the outside of the building. I haven't yet had the chance to get, because it's hard to get the original copy of this book that costs like $5,000, the original copy of the book and the original copy of Ayn Rand's tracing, and place them together to prove that. But I'm like more than 90% sure that's exactly where that came from. So you can see, you get some pretty wild designs.
Bruno Taut?
This is Bruno Taut. Yeah.
I thought this was Bruno Taut.
No, that's Bruno Taut. This is Adolf Loos on the
Yeah.
left. Yes. And then this is Walter Gropius. And then now we can unshare for just a second. So there was a lot going on. And we'll get back to the next section I wanted to talk about is I like to, give me your little note that you have there. I like to just point out to everybody what's happening. Rob starts with this little list of all the things. I mean, I don't know how many different sections he's bringing in. Cyrano de Bergerac. He brings in this thing about the chickens, right? This Chanticleer. He brings that up. You all think it's just this interesting tidbit that he's bringing up because it makes sense. It ties into what he's saying. He's really bringing this up because he's putting me in the position that I absolutely have to talk about chicken coops. So I want you to know he's up to stuff here, people. So go ahead and share. We have one of my other favorite sections. Is one of the things I like to do is I like to say, oh, let's take a look at the descriptions of the buildings and see if we can find something like it. So, okay, so we're getting to this line when we see Howard Roark desperately looking for construction projects to work on. And where's this?
It's Eliza Keating says it a few pages earlier. 154, I think.
154.
Or 455. Here it is.
Oh yeah, here we go. Sorry, I didn't write down the right page number. So Louisa Keating is talking about, we have on the one hand, we've got Howard Roark struggling to find projects, and we've got Louisa Keating complaining to her son Peter about why he needs to be aiming higher. And she makes this line: you've got to play the game as the big men of this world see it. You've got to live up to them. What will they think of the man who married to the, that's not the line.
No. What will they think of your wife?
What will they think? What will they think of your wife? This is when he's trying to get rid of Katie. What will they think of you? You don't make your living building chicken coops for soda jerkers.
Don't you forget that.
Don't you forget that. So this is another one of those details. This little line, chicken coops for soda jerkers, comes up very soon because, and by the way, that's my chicken coop, which is why Rob he went digging around specifically.
Because you have designed a chicken coop.
I have designed a chicken
built it.
coop and built it, yes. See, he's up to stuff, everybody. Okay, so we get chicken coops for soda jerkers. We get Howard Roark when he is desperately looking for jobs, and along comes Mr. Goen, Jimmy Goen, and his filling station. And so I want to give you a little bit of other history. At this time, and should we get the description of it first?
Yeah, give us a description.
Maybe you should stop sharing.
Oh, then no, do this. Oh, sorry.
At this time, we've got the early stages of thin shell construction happening in the US. And it would have been things that Ayn Rand saw in her research by then, but it happened actually in the same time period. At this point in time, we're seeing Howard Roark in 1926. And so this is one of the earliest examples. This is the Brook Hill Dairy it was part of the Chicago World's Fair. And this looks like, what is she showing us a dairy for? Over here on the left, these arched roofs, these barrel arches, that was the milking station. This was a thin shell structure. It was one of the very first thin shell concrete structures built in the US. So when we talk about this go-in filling station and it's concrete and glass, I can't help but think about some of these early examples of thin shell concrete in the US. So there's this one. The next example I wanted to show you, this is a Hershey, Pennsylvania. A Hershey chocolate company built a stadium, an arena, and this is also thin shell concrete structure. It's quite large. And the third example of the early 1920s first thin shells in the US is the Hayden Planetarium, which this no longer exists, which is why I like to show this particular example of it. This dome was the inside of the theater. It was also a thin shell construction. I think it was something like 82 feet across or something like that. And I want you to have those thin shells in your mind when I read to you this description of the filling station. And then I've got a couple of potential other ideas to show you what she might have had in mind. So it stood on the edge of the Boston Post Road, two small structures of glass and concrete forming a semicircle among the trees. The cylinder of the office and the long, low oval of the diner, with the gasoline pumps as the colonnade of a forecourt between them. It was a study in circles. There were no angles, no straight lines. It looked like shapes caught in a flow, held still at the moment of being poured, at the precise moment when they formed a harmony that seemed too perfect to be intentional. It looked like a cluster of bubbles hanging low over the ground, not quite touching it, to be swept aside in an instant on a wind of speed. It looked gay with the hard bracing gaiety of efficiency, like a powerful airplane engine. And so I just wanted to show you a couple of ideas of what some thin shells can be. This curving shape that she describes, no angles, no straight lines, looked like shapes caught in a flow. At the moment of being poured.
What is that last one?
This one is, you're going to ask me these and I don't have all these. I don't have them all written down. I think I wrote them in your notes. This is in Valencia, Spain. This is oceanographer. This is an aquarium. And this one, by the way, this aquarium was built in 1997. So obviously much, much later, but thin shells were just starting to happen at around the time that she was writing this. This is some of what they developed into. Now, this one is particularly interesting because this is a filling station. This is a filling station in Switzerland off the A1 highway. It was done in 1968. So you get the sense of bubbles, clusters of bubbles hanging low over the ground, not quite touching it. Don't you get that sense? And I think that is, you gotta undo here, Rob. And that is my pick for what I think she might have been talking about for what probably was considered Howard Rourke's first chicken coop for soda jerkers was his go and filling station. So I think she had in mind some of these early thin shell designs. And I know Rupali loves that. All right, so that's what I have for today. Did we lose Shrikant? We did. Okay, so next, oh, somebody else mentioned Buckminster Fuller. Yes, very much. Yes, that would work too, except for his are all straight lines, you know, so it's got to have.
How do you make a dome out of only straight lines?
Yeah, yeah. And the funniest thing is about these thin shell structures, they are all about straight lines. It's just that it's like a parabola. It's all made out of straight lines, but the way that you see it, you don't ever see the straight line. So, all right, Shrikant, you're up.
All right. Next up is Rupali, followed by Iris. Rupali.
Sherri, thank you for bringing up the shells. Really, absolutely like them a lot. We both have strong interest in ferrocrete and ferrocement, and thin shells is part of that. Can you hear me, Shrikant?
Let's see. I think your internet is very bad. Do you want to just log out and come back again? Hello? All right. Don't know what's happening with the internet.
The snow.
Shrikant, can you hear me clearly now? I just
it's
tried
off
it.
and on. Okay, let's try it. Let's try it. Go ahead.
Okay. So, Sherri, thank you for that. I'm going to start with Ayn Rand's quote on the very first page of the book. Whatever their future at the dawn of their lives, men seek a noble vision of man's nature and life's potential. And what is man's nature and life's potential, right? Every person, we've talked this in Bhagavad Gita, we've talked about it in the Romantic Manifesto, in kindergarten chats, that every person has that spiritual embryo or that spiritual potential to be able to produce something and reach that highest potential from with their own will and their own thought and their own actions. So I want to talk about it through a Montessori point of view and through a parenting point of view. So in Montessori too, when you look at the child, you say every child has the same potential. And yet when you look through this book, right, you have Peter Keating, you have Guy Franken, you have Mrs. Keating, you have Cameron, you have Rourke, you have Dominique, all of them with different personalities. So if we all have the same potential, how do we all come up with different personalities? So I wanted to take a look at, you know, what Maria Montessori talks about. It's the environment and how the prepared adult is in the development of a child's personality. So it's very interesting that the book starts when both Peter and Rourke are leaving college and they are entering into the world of adulthood. They are going to participate in actual life. And that's the goal of education, is preparation for life. So when our son was 3 years old and we were looking for Montessori schools for him, one of the principals, she asked Rohit and me, she said, what do you see your son becoming when he is 24, 25, entering the world of adulthood? And she said, don't tell me the profession, tell me what qualities you look for. What will he be? And we had to write down a list. He'll be confident, happy, be able to do things on his own, be independent, and so on and so forth. And she asked us the question, well, how are you going to get there? And, when I read Ayn Rand and I talk about it. Many people say that, oh, well, she never talks about a family structure or she never talks about parenting. And when I read this first part of Fountainhead, all that comes to my mind is parenting and upbringing and what really shapes Peter's personality and Roark's personality. So if we take Mrs. Keating, and if Peter were a 3-year-old boy and she went to a Montessori school, and I do that at our school, I ask all the parents, what do you want for your children? What do you see them becoming? And she would probably say that I want him to become successful. So that's an outcome, not a quality, not a virtue, no value. I want him to be rich. I want him to have the largest buildings. I want him to be the greatest person known for whatever profession he chooses. I want him to marry someone with status who will help him move ahead in his career. None of this is based on values. It's based on what Shrikant says, the periphery, what people are saying and what the status or what's acceptable by everybody. And so then, that if we then look at it, that, what does Cameron have to say about Roark? If Cameron went as a guardian to a Montessori school, and he would say that, I would like this boy to become independent. He has the potential. I want him to do his best. It's not going to be easy. He's going to have to build resilience and make mistakes along the way, and then be the best that he can be. And for that, the principal would say, well, how are you going to get your children there? And Mrs. Keating is going to say, well, I'm going to tell him that I'm giving up everything for him. I'm going to sacrifice everything I have, and I'm going to tell him what's right. He loves art, but that's not going to take him anywhere. He has to become an architect. And Cameron is going to say, well, let's see what he wants to do. Let's ask him. And he'll ask him questions, and he'll ask him, what do you think? Instead of saying, I want you to do ABC. So I think she really, in this first part of the book, brings about those two parenting styles. I want to share my screen and show you a book called Positive Discipline by Jane Nelson. And in this book, she talks about four parenting styles. And I'm taking this portion from Kathleen Nelson Simley's blog. It was published on December 3rd, 2020. So there is a parenting style which says, because I said so. I'm telling you what's right for you. You don't know what's right for you. Well, that's Mrs. Keating. Peter wants to do something, but Peter, what do you know? What will others think? What will others say? What do you not want to do it for me? And then there is the other style where the parent says, do whatever you want. And that's a very permissive style. So Mrs. Keating's style is an authoritarian style. She knows what's best for Peter. Then there is a style where the parent thinks that the child can just grow. You drop a seed in the field and nature will take its course, and the seed is going to grow no matter what, because nature is going to provide everything. So there's no concept of a gardener or a nurturing soul that has to trim the weeds, water the plants, fertilize the plant, and provide the nourishment that the plant needs to grow. So that's the permissive style. Then there's the style which is, I really don't care. It's complete neglect, abuse. The parent is not at all available for the child. And then there is the authoritative style where the parent says, let's talk about it. And all of us as parents have a mix of all four, but there's one dominant style. And I would always think, well, if Ayn Rand hasn't written about parenting, all the friends that I have who are Ayn Rand followers or who get Ayn Rand, somehow they all are the last authoritative types. Let's talk about it. Let's figure it out. They're involved. They ask questions and they set boundaries. They know what's morally accepted, not accepted, what's right and wrong, and so on and so forth. So then we have, I'm just going to show two parenting styles. So this is, so these are the four parenting styles: permissive, authoritative, uninvolved, and authoritarian. And you can see that on the x-axis is the demand, and on the y-axis is the responsiveness. So a mother like Mrs. Keating or a parent like Mrs. Keating they have very high expectations of their children. And the rules are to succeed. You have to be successful. There's no option. And they're very forceful, whether it's comparing them to other children. They demand, this is the only way, it's my way or the highway. They're very rigid. Okay, I'm telling you, this is not right for you. There's no other way. We're not going to have a conversation. And what happens to these children who grow up in such parenting style is that they are not happy children because they never have the ability to think for themselves. They never have the opportunity to pursue what they want. And if they are not doing what they want, they're not going to be happy. They're always trying to please somebody else. You see in Peter's case, he's always trying to please his mother, and that's never enough. She never is satisfied. They are less independent. They cannot think for themselves. They are insecure. They have low self-esteem. They perform worse academically. Now, I want to say this over here. Peter Keating did not perform poorly in college. Yet, if you look at all his work in his career, he performs very poorly. He always is unsatisfied with his own sketches. He's going to Rourke all the time for help and for approval. He's always thinking, even when he applies for the competition, he's thinking, what is Ralston going to think? Oh, I know he likes the Renaissance style, so I better make the facade with the Renaissance style. So it's never about him. They have poor social skills. Okay, so Ayn Rand talks about Peter going out and about, socializing with people, and Heller asks Rourke, are you antisocial? You're so antisocial. And Rourke says, no, I agree I have to be social, but I'm going to be social with people who get me, and I get them. I can look at their faces and I know that this is the person I want to socialize with. So he's very selective about the people he wants to socialize with. They're prone, the children who grew up under authoritarian discipline style, which is what Mrs. Keating's style is. They usually have mental health issues, and they can easily fall into addiction. They can have suicidal thoughts, and they cannot cope with reality of life. And then you have someone like Cameron, who is an authoritative. So that's in the top right corner of this chart. The responsiveness is high and demands are also high. So in Mrs. Keating's case, she really doesn't care about Peter's feelings or Peter's thoughts, yet she wants him to think about everybody else's feelings and everybody else's thoughts. Now, in Cameron's style, he has high expectations. He knows the standards because he's achieved them himself. He has come to those conclusions through his own thought and through his own work. So because of that, he knows the limits. He knows what's right and wrong. He knows what every human being can possibly do. And because of that, he can give Rourke the freedom to think for himself. He is responsive. So when Rourke goes with the drawings for the Heller house to him, Cameron actually talks to him about, okay, show me the sketch. He studies the sketch. He gets involved. He asks questions. he's not telling Roark what to do, but he is still coaching him. And it's a warm relationship that we see through Cameron's way of kind of mentoring Roark. And so through this kind of discipline method, you see that children who grow up under an authoritative type of parenting style, they are independent because they've always been asked, what would you like to do? There's a give and take of conversation. And because of that, they are able to succeed in life. And so Roark is kicked out of college, and yet he is the one who can design buildings. He's the one who can problem solve. He's the one who can say, oh, well, I've made a mistake in this house. I want to fix this wing and I want to correct it because that's the right thing to do. And he does it because he has integrity and he expects that in his work. They can interact with people at a very social level without expecting from each other, right? Other than just mutual respect and mutual understanding. And you see that with his interaction with Mike, with Heller, with Jimmy Goan. And you see he's trying to explain himself to others, but they don't get him. But he's content with a handful of friends. He's happy. So he doesn't have depression or anxiety or any addiction issues. He doesn't need to go out to drink to relax. And he doesn't have violent tendencies. So I wanted to share that because if you look at how Roark and Peter develop into adults, you see exactly those outcomes. And I want to say, if you look at Peter and Roark and how they work with relationships, Peter is always taught to think for others, get that he can get work only through connections. That if she says, his mother says on page 154, Peter, your life does not belong to you. If you're really aiming high, you cannot allow yourself to indulge every whim as ordinary people can, because with them, it doesn't matter anyway. So there's this feeling of ordinary and extraordinary, that all people are not equal. There are these ordinary people, and Peter, you are going to be extraordinary. You are a special child. It's not you or me or what we feel, Peter. It's your career. It takes strength to deny yourself in order to win other people's respect. And then she goes on to talk about marriage. And okay, so in India, there's this concept of arranged marriages. And I used to watch my cousins and my friends whose parents would get them married off because the boy was the suitable boy was from a certain family and had certain status. And she would be the right fit for him, but nobody asked her what she wanted, right? And yet we come from a culture where the concept of swayamvar, that means swayam is yourself, var is your husband, and you yourself choose your husband. That is if you look at the ancient culture of India, that is what's in the text. And yet what society has done is just the opposite to those texts. So here Mrs. Keating says, whatever would I dislike about her? I can't say that I approve of a girl who has so little consideration of a man that she'll run to him and upset him over nothing at all and ask him to chuck his future out the window because she gets some crazy notion. That shows what help you can get from a wife like that. But then on the other hand, she says that Dominique is going to help him. And Peter says, "Mother, please," he whispered so desperately that she could allow herself to go on without restraint. When I read that, I just felt so sorry for Peter. Here is his love, the one person that he can be with, just be himself. And as a mother, she is denying him that. And she thinks that's right for him. Having a child who is about that age where they're making life's decisions, you feel, how can you do that? No great man ever got there alone. Don't shrug it off. How much the right women's help, the best of them. Your Franken didn't marry a chambermaid. You bet your life he didn't. Just try to see things through other people's eyes for a bit. What will they think of your wife? What will they think of you? You don't make your living building chicken coops for soda jerkers. Don't you forget that. You've got to play the game as the big men of the world see it. You've got to live up to them. What will they think of a man who's married a common little piece of baggage like that? Will they admire you? Will they trust you? Will they respect you? Shut up, he cried. But she went on. She spoke for a long time while he sat cracking his knuckles savagely, moaning once in a while. But I love her. I can't, mother. I can't. I love her. I mean, this just broke my heart when I read this. I was like, oh. And then unfortunately he goes, last week Sherri showed us those books with white spines, and that image came to my mind when he goes to Katie's house and he tells her to wait. And I just thought, a man without a spine. And, it's unfortunate because this idea of marrying into status or whatever is still prevalent. I was at a wedding a few years ago, lavish wedding, and I said to the mother of the bride that, oh, how wonderful this young couple looks, like so much in love. And she says, love has nothing to do with this marriage. She's just marrying into the right family. And I thought, wow, this is in today's world. And this book was written, 70 years ago or so. And it's still true, unfortunately, still true. And so people should read Fountainhead. And that's why it's so popular when children are in college. All right. What does Peter grow up into? He gets work through connection. He'll do whatever it takes. He dirty tricks to live. He gives up his love. And then, at what level can he actually come down to? And you see that he goes to Hare's place and he starts blackmailing him, knowing fully well that that's the one thing that's going to kill him. And he says, so unless you inform Franken of your retirement tomorrow morning, he concluded, holding the letter by a corner between his two fingers. This goes to the AGA. So this is a person who, his mother thought that he would be successful. And Rob talked about, what does success mean, right? Is this really being successful? And in the Romantic Manifesto, Ayn Rand talks about, what is the adult's obligation? She says in the chapter on art and moral treason, she says, thus the adult whose foremost obligation toward the child at this stage of his development is to help him understand what he loves as an abstraction, to help him break through into the conceptual realm, accomplish just the exact opposite. And that's Mrs. Keating. Instead of helping Peter get what he really wants, she is doing just the opposite for him. Well, the child who can withstand this, Ayn Rand says, the child who withstands this kind of upbringing and damns the attacker, not himself and his values, is a rare exception. That's Rourke. The child who merely suppresses his values, avoids communication, and withdraws into a lonely private universe is almost as rare. In most cases, the child represses his values and gives up. He gives up the entire realm of valuing, of value choices and judgments without knowing that what he is surrendering to is morality. This surrender, this is really heartbreaking. This surrender is exhorted by a long, almost imperceptible process, a constant, ubiquitous pressure which the child absorbs and accepts by degrees. His spirit is not broken at one sudden blow. It's bled to death in thousands of small scratches. I mean, you can see this happening to Peter Keating, that what she does to him, he's internalized and he's applying it to the people in his, and I like Shrikant's periphery analogy, that he is applying it to the world that he has formed and thinks that that's how it should be. And he actually just pretty much sells his soul when he goes to Hare's place and knows perfectly well what the letter's going to do to Hare and kills this. So that's one thing. His designs are not about the structure. His designs are about what other people want. It's not what he wants. And we talked about that. He has absolutely no compassion, you know, when he is, when Lucius Hare is in the hospital, he does not even go to see him. He knows fully well that he is in the hospital and he doesn't go to see him. So then he talks about being selfish. And is that being selfish? Right? And how does he live? So if you look at the last chapter in this section, chapter 15, it starts with the sentence, "This was fear. This was what one feels in nightmares," thought Peter Keating. "Only then one awakens when it becomes unbearable." But he could neither awaken nor bear it any longer. It had been growing for days, for weeks, and now it had caught him, this unspeakable dread of defeat. So to go to bed every night in fear, I mean, what kind of a life is that? He becomes an angry person. When he leaves Howard Rourke, Maritza talked about how Howard Rourke gives him the check. And when he leaves Howard Rourke on page 193, he says, "God damn you," he screamed, "God damn you. What do you think you are? Who told you you could do this to people? So you're too good for that building? You want to make me ashamed of it? You rotten, lousy, conceited bastard. Who are you? You don't even have the wits to know you're a flop, an incompetent, a beggar, a failure, a failure, a failure. And you stand there pronouncing judgment. You against the whole country, you against everybody. Why should I listen to you? You can't frighten me. You can't touch me. I have the whole world with me." So he's just angry. You know, he's angry, he's fearful. That's what he's become because of the parenting style of Mrs. Keating and the environment that he grew up in. But now, let's look at Howard Rourke. Because then you have Cameron, who's very supportive. And Rourke himself has that spark in him that he guards. And as Ayn Rand says in Romantic Manifesto, that's a rare thing. But there are few children who can guard that and can grow up with that. And that's really the struggle against the world, because everybody in that periphery don't understand it. And that's why Rourke is having such a struggle to prove who he is or be who he is. And that's why on page 132, when Cameron says to Howard Roark, he says, Howard shows him the picture of his office and he says, it doesn't say much, only Howard Roark, architect. But it's like those mottos men carved over the entrances of a castle and died for. It's a challenge in the face of something so vast, so dark, that all the pain on the earth, and do you know how much suffering there is on earth? All the pain comes from that thing that you are going to face. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it should be unleashed against you. I only know that it will be. And I know that if you carry these words through to the end, it will be a victory, Howard, not just for you, but for something that should win, that moves the world and never wins acknowledgement. It will vindicate so many who have fallen before you, who have suffered as you will suffer. May God bless you, or whoever it is that is alone to see the best, the highest possible to the human hearts. You're on your way to hell, Howard. So that's what he says to him. And you can see the contrasting style of Mrs. Keating. So Howard doesn't care about being on top, and he is more about his own integrity and whether he's doing the right thing. He doesn't care about what others think of him, but he does his work based on his own principles. He says, on page 159, he says, Heller says to him, you must learn how to handle people. And Roark says, but I don't like people who have to be handled. What can I tell people in order to get commissions? I can only show my work. If they don't hear that, they won't hear anything that I say. I'm nothing to them but my work. My work is all we have in common, and I have no desire to tell them anything else. So he is completely based on his own merit. And he's willing to work with people who are his kind. And there was a point that somebody made last week in the questions section about people who read Fountainhead tend to become antisocial. And I like this part on page 160 where Heller says, then you don't need other people after all, do you, Howard? And he says, well, of course. What are you laughing at? And he says, I've always thought you were the most antisocial animal I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. But then Howard is saying that I like people, but I like people who have a core just that I have that mirrors mine. And so it's very good to see how she brings about this character of Howard Roark, who's not just this antisocial, arrogant person, but he really has the compassion in him, right? So then we see in multiple cases that he has all these clients, Mrs. Wilmot, Mr. Mundy, Mr. Janice, who, none of them are the right client for him, and he is willing to let them go. He's willing to wait. He has the patience to wait for the right client. So on page 164, he says, later Austin Heller said to him, I expected it. I was afraid you would turn him down. I'm not blaming you, Howard. Only he's so rich. It could have helped you so much. And after all, you've got to live. And he says, not that way. I don't want to live that way. So when we started our school, we had several people who would come and say, this is a Montessori school. And Montessori schools can be a variety of things for a variety of people based on how they interpret Montessori. And no two Montessori schools are alike. And when we started the school, many people came to us and said, well, you're Montessori, so you should be doing this. You can allow children to do whatever they want, and so on and so forth. And last summer, the teachers got together and said, we have to create a document of who we are and who we are not, and what we will not tolerate. And so now we have that document. And when I read this line, not that way. It just reminded me that, okay, you can set your boundaries. You can define who you are. You don't have to do what everybody else is doing. So that's one thing. And so he lives on his own terms. He says, I'm not going to live that way. He has the confidence to wait. He has the patience to wait. He has the confidence to say what he wants. And then, I want to talk about how Rourke is a compassionate human being. And we see how Peter deals with Hare's death. And then we also have Cameron's death. And when Cameron's health is failing, Rourke goes to his place. He's always there for Cameron. He is silently there. He's just taking care as a normal human being, as somebody who understands life, that this is a natural process. And Cameron and he actually have a very good conversation with each other in those last days. And so, to show that the contrast in this whole first section of the book between Peter and Rourke, you can see that although Peter is doing everything that fits the social norms, he really is not a good human being. And although Rourke challenges everything that is acceptable as a social norm, he actually is a good human being, somebody with values, a compassionate human being, a social solitary, so to say, that he is social with people, but he can stand on his own 2 feet and say, this is who I am. He's a problem solver. He sees things for as they are. And Peter is willfully blind in many cases because he just doesn't want to accept reality. And so Peter grows up as an adult who is fearful, anxious, not confident, and Rourke grows up as a confident, joyful young man. So I'll end with that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Rupali. I particularly liked your parallels between the relationship between Rourke and Cameron at the end of his days and Peter and Hare. It's just beautiful, beautiful parallels. I had not thought of that before. Thank you. Next up is Iris. Give me just a second, Iris. Go ahead. Can you, oh, your computer. Okay, you can try, go ahead and try to unmute yourself. Go ahead. Let me try to unmute. Okay, try it now, Iris. No, let me see. It should be possible. Let's try it again.
It was locked. It's not.
Now I have unlocked it. Iris, can you go ahead and try? Let me see what's going on. Iris, let's try that. Can you go ahead and click on unmute? No? Let's do one thing. Can you leave and come back into the Zoom again? Many times that will fix the problem. We'll wait for you. No? Okay, the computer is frozen. Okay, let's do one thing. You can try, what I would recommend is you just click on the end or leave button on Zoom and then click on the link again and come back. Okay, let's try that. Okay, let's see. Okay, all right. Let's do one thing. We'll go to comments and questions from everybody. Oh, you know what? Oh, those are the phone numbers. Okay. I didn't know that. Okay. But let's start with comments. As you know, we'll interrupt whenever Iris gets back. So, Dominique, what do you think?
Yeah, so many things. First of all, great presentation by everyone. I got so much out of all of it, so I'm going to try to be quick. First of all, Maritza, I am Team Dominique. I kind of see her as an independent woman, but not just because she has the money, which I think is a big factor in that she doesn't have to do this. I think I like her because she's one of those people that you never have to wonder where you stand with her. You will always know because she will tell you where she stands with you. And I tend to like people like that because a lot of people can be like Keating and give you like these like sweet nothings in your ear. And then you're just like, whatever. But at least with Dominique, you may not like what she says, but at least you know. And I think with Keating, I guess I don't feel sorry for Keating because to me, like the whole thing about him going to his mother, and I understand when people are saying, his mother should have encouraged him to go love, but that wasn't Louise Keating. From the very beginning of the book, Peter went to his mother because he knew exactly the way she felt about Catherine. It's like going to your mom with a guy or a girl that she doesn't like, and then you expect her to, and then you're like expecting her to encourage you to go with that person. They're not. I think Iris is back.
Iris, let's try two things. You can try to click on mute. Otherwise, you can call a number. Can I give you a number to call? Okay, it is 312-626-6799. Okay, you can call on the phone. Sorry, Evanik, please go on.
Oh, no worries. But yeah, so to me, I feel like Keating was going to the moms to kind of have the excuse to break up with Catherine or to not marry Catherine. Like
sorry, let me interrupt for Iris.
Yeah.
If when you call on the phone, if they ask you for the meeting ID or the passcode, it is there in the chat. So if you click on the chat, Rohit Sharma has put. Okay, let me see what I can do here.
You have to read out that number. She can't.
Okay, I will. Okay, I'll read out the meeting ID for you. Meeting ID, when they ask for it, it is 876-4170-7700. And if they ask for a passcode, the passcode is 391. The passcode is 391901. All right, see you soon, Iris, or hear you soon. Next up, Evanik, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's why I think I just don't have sympathy for Keating, because I think he's the type of guy that shirks responsibility on everybody but himself. Like he just can't take responsibility for his life to save his life. And I think it's a deliberate move because when people do that, then they don't, if something goes wrong, it's not their fault. If something goes wrong, well, this person told me, that person told me. You never take ownership. And so, like, I see Keating as that. I think I still have sympathy for Catherine, though. And the reason why I think, A, because she's young, and B, I think she'll take Keating. I think she kind of loves Keating no matter what for who he is, which, you could say is crazy. I personally would not put up with that, but she knows who he is and she still chooses him. And I guess in a sense, that's like love. You know their faults and yet you still choose them. So I think that's the two main points I wanted to say.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I guess my question is with work, I understand that he's supposed to be the hero, but I don't really see him that way. I don't think he even sees himself that way. You know, he's just a person doing what he wants to do. I guess I don't get why Ayn Rand is making him out to be a hero. Like he's choosing his own fate. I get that. But I'm like, also, I've been poor. And I'm like, that's not a place you want to be. So a lot of us work so that we can pay the bills. Like, what was the problem with him doing those clients to get his bills paid and to launch his own business?
Got it.
I guess I just wonder why she's making him into the hero.
Got it. Thank you. I want to just point out one thing, respond to one comment about Dominique. You said rightly that she will always speak her mind to anybody she's talking to. But other thing you will notice throughout, oh, there is Iris. Let me see if I can manage, if she can unmute. Iris, can you unmute on the phone? Yes, Iris, go ahead. We can.
Hello.
Go ahead. Okay, just a second. Wait. You have to cut down. You have to cut out your audio on your computer. If you okay, can you talk to us from another room?
Yeah, I'll do that. Okay. Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. My computer is completely frozen. I cannot move anything on it.
No problem. We've got high-tech phone now. Let's
Yes.
talk.
Okay. Let me go get my notes. I'll be right back.
Okay. So, Evanik, I wanted to point out that as you read the whole book, you will notice that everybody else opens their hearts to Dominique, Peter Keating, Gail Wyman, Toohey, Howard Roark, all the main characters talk to her like they talk to nobody else. And they talk right from the heart. They reveal who they are to her. Just like she's speaking the truth, everybody speaks truth to her. So that is another characteristic of Dominique. All right, Iris, go ahead.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, first of all, I thought I'd do a little defense of books by the foot. It depends on how they're being used. You know, if you're a person who has no interest in tastes and you just want, 20 feet of books to make it look nice in your living room, that's horrible. But if you're trying to sell a house that perhaps someone else lived in, or first time it's been on the market, and you're staging the house, you put furniture in it. One of the things I heard was a home that had been built near the sea, and so they asked for several feet, a foot of books that were about the state, the neighborhood they were in, and all sorts of things about the sea. So
Thank you.
It can have some purpose. Let's see. Notes here. Oh, one of the things I wanted to mention that everyone else may know, but I didn't know, you can go online and search Fountainhead Ayn Rand, and there are books that you can read the Fountainhead online, by chapter. You can also get audio of it, and I particularly like listening to the audio while reading the actual words in type. It's a really good way to study. Let's see. Oh, there was some comment about Stoics at the beginning. I was just listening to the Hidden Brain podcast and found out about a book called The Stoic Challenge, and it's about minimizing pain and maximizing joy. I don't know what the book is like, but the podcast was very interesting. It's a guide to the good life, and it's just full of descriptions of things that I've done all my life. that's really all I have to say right now. I got really thrown by having my computer frozen.
No problem, Iris. No problem. Next time we will make sure we'll test your computer. Just log in maybe 10 minutes earlier, and we'll make sure your computer is working fine. Okay.
Well, I'll have to hire my tech guy to come in and figure out what's going wrong.
Wonderful.
I unplugged and plugged 6 different plugs
That's all right.
are related
Thank
to the
you.
computer, and the computer never even stopped and came back just as frozen.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Jyoti. Joe.
Yes, there have been so many, I mean, again, fantastic presentations as always. I mean, it really, everybody brought a different perspective. And it was really, it's educational, and it really is it makes it a wonderful meetup. I am too going to agree that I am a little bit on, I want to also thank Houheneka for her comment, because her comment just now, and a lot of this, I just think about design. Her comment just now, the idea that Peter was outsourcing his decisions so that nothing else was his fault. That is really important. I mean, we just talked about this in the Design Way meetups, this idea of abdicating our own responsibilities, and that how that is a way of kind of saying, it's not my fault if this design doesn't go correctly. So that it's really, you're the anti-designer in this particular instance. So we just covered that, and it was a fantastic point that I had not thought of until Houheneka had made her comment. But the other thing is, I'm a little bit, I'm with Maritza on Team Dominique. Sorry, Rob. I mean, I can understand your frustrations, but and I agree with you, she is very stoic in the sense that she's not tied to outcomes. She does not care about what the outcome of her actions are. And that is a stoic belief. So, but her review of the New York slums, that is courage in its utmost. The idea that and there's this feeling, and I get this feeling in general, is that she understands that her father's architecture is not genuine. It's not sincere. And so that there's this kind of rejection of high society in general. It's a critique of high society and of the conformist beliefs that kind of are represented in high society. I also find it interesting how at the same time, Rourke is losing turning down the opportunity to design a bank, and he's at his lowest point, while Peter is actually turning down the opportunity to marry somebody that he loves. And it's like the timing couldn't be like, these are two different people, two different places. It's really telling. And it's telling as to what their values are, or lack thereof in certain cases. And I find that to me, it's an interesting contrast how Ayn Rand sets up each one of her characters, how you think this is the way to the top versus what the high road will lead to. I guess, I have a lot of I'm trying to think of some other points that I was really thinking about with this, but I guess if I'll just a question that I would pose is, and Rob alluded this to Plato's ideal. It has to relate to that. Is that how does the nonconformist seek truth versus the conformist? And I think those are two different, very different paths. The conformist is always looking to, well, whatever is true. Whatever exists is true. And when you're thinking about architecture,
Joe, I thought that was the question.
Well, okay. Yeah, that is the question. So, but I would like to know what everybody else thinks.
Sure.
About
yeah.
Because so that's my thought. But it is the
Absolutely.
question.
I'll ask you a question, and then you can give Then everybody give the answer and you give the answer. How about that?
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. Next up is going to be Jyoti, Rohit, and Laura. Jyoti.
Okay, first of all, I have to thank each one of you for making such a wonderful presentation. Secondly, I have two questions. I don't know how I'm going to pose them into questions. I have comments, but I'm going to see if I can pull it out in a questionnaire form, because this is a question.
Don't worry, Jyoti. You say something, I will convert it into questions. That's what I do.
Okay.
I'm a transformer. I transform everything into questions.
All right. So we'll start with my friend Rupali. Being a school psychologist and child psychologist, I really enjoyed your commentary about the different ways of parenting and how they affect the children. My question is, how much genetics play into it? Because I've seen a lot of good parents, their children don't turn out not good parents, good parenting techniques, and their children turn out just the opposite of what their parents have, done for them. So how much that plays into it too? So that's my question for Rupali. And I agree with her arranged marriages. I feel so sorry, although I'm a victim of arranged marriage, when mine turned out to be, because the way my parents were, by the time my turn came, they had that laissez-faire techniques with me. And that worked out very, very well, because they said, you do whatever education you want, you do that, whatever you want. You don't want to marry him, don't marry him, marry him. I was confused. I said, no, you tell me whether I should marry him or not. But anyway, that was a good piece. So with Dominique, I like her personality, but she is sheltering herself. She is self-preservation. My question is, why does she want to run away from hurt and pain, which is a natural process of maturity and growth? And she's very, very particular. If I don't expect anything, I will not get anything from anybody that will disappoint me or make me painful. So these are two questions which I can come up with right now.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Jyoti. Next
you.
up is Rohit, followed by Laura. Rohit. Rohit, you need to unmute.
Sorry, I was saying I just read Fountainhead after many years. I made a quick pass and then I have to go through it again. But I think what I realized that I did not think of earlier was that every character, or at least every main, sub-main character that she's laid out, she gives them a chance of redemption. So, she lays out very clearly what would it require for Peter to redeem himself. She lays it out very clearly. Actually, Roark lays it out very clearly for Dominique. What does it require for her to redeem herself? And by redeeming, I mean achieving their highest potential. And so on and so forth, which is what I found very, very interesting. And, especially in those conversations like Peter is having with his mother, in those conversations, sprinkled among them is this kind of gems of, what it would take for somebody who's at that point to redeem himself, to achieve their highest potential. That's pretty much the only comment that I had.
Wonderful. Excellent comment, Rohit. That's absolutely true. It's like they get actually there are several decision
Correct.
points, several chances.
Yeah.
And at each point they choose the other way. Thank you. Laura, what's your comment or question?
Okay, first of all, I want to be on that train with Dominique and Maritza and everyone else. But I think it's one of the things that hit me that when we're talking about Roark, and I think he's actually being, when you think of him, he has an arrogance about him, about how he goes about his work all the time, because he knows he's better than everyone else. Okay, so I think he rides on that and he believes in himself. And that's what I'll say about Roark. I do think that Peter is also a wuss, and he set himself up in every path. He can't do anything else but be that. I mean, no matter what decision he makes, whatever it is, it will always be on the wrong line. I will not be on the train of success because he's not capable of it. He ignored his mother's pushing all his life. He was scared of it, whatever it is. And he has no way of redeeming himself, no matter how many times you give him a chance. He can't do it. He never learned it. It's just not there. It's not, he's not saying no because he really believes, and he just can't do it. So those are my comments about Peter. And I mean, I just find, it's really phenomenal as everybody's talking about this book, because I read it also when I was a teenager. And the guy who sat next to me in homeroom was also reading it. He had a passion for these books. And I just, because we always argued every morning about something, I think I took an alternative approach to him. And I think that's why I grew up not liking Ayn Rand very much. But on the other hand, I think I still don't like her very much for her ideals. But anyway, I think it's been really interesting listening to everybody's viewpoint, and I can't wait to continue with this. I wonder how much things will change. But, it's also hard, after you read Louis Sullivan, to go and put this book in, because I can't get Sullivan out of my head, and sometimes I just really want Rourke to be Sullivan, and let's make this good. It's really, I'm like, I am completely, everything I think about, every time I go out and look at a tree, I start talking about the tree, and I did this with my daughter and said, "What are you talking about? You're crazy, And I said, no, you have to think about these things."
Thank you.
But
Thank you,
anyway,
Laura.
all right, that's all I have to say. Thank
Wonderful.
you for letting
Thank
me
you.
in.
Thank you. Actually, let me ask Maritza. Maritza, we have an opening for the Wednesday. And last time we were planning to do 3 religions and 3 architects. I'm thinking of doing form and function and using that as an idea, basically Louis Sullivan's idea of form and function and comprehensivism, how you can use. Do you think you want to, what do you think of the idea?
I think it's a great idea.
Okay.
Depends on my calendar.
Okay, but let me know if you're free this Wednesday.
This Wednesday.
This Wednesday.
I'll let you know.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. So that's what I'm thinking of doing. So Laura gets a little bit of her Louis Sullivan fix. And it's always, I can't have enough of it anyway. So, all right, so let's go for questions, but I'm going to keep it short. So it looks like, Rob, everybody who has spoken likes, likes Dominique. So let's take only the question on Dominique. Okay, so I'll put it as a question, but you can say anything else anybody wants to say about Dominique. So we're going to just discuss Dominique and then we're going to close.
Can
So
I
go ahead.
jump in first?
Yep.
And not talk about Dominique?
Okay, go ahead.
It'll be quick though.
Yes, go ahead.
No, I'm burning to mention something. So Evanique talked about Rourke. Why wouldn't he just take the job to pay the bills? Because honestly, we all have to. And Joe mentioned Rourke turning down that opportunity to design the bank. There's something I wanted to mention about those 2 comments. Rourke does do what he has to do to pay the bills. And his choice is to go work in the quarry instead of taking the designs, like say the Manhattan Bank building. And remember, he was working with Cameron because he knew he needed to learn something more. And so when he does the initial design for the Manhattan Bank building, he's already done a basic floor plan and a sketch. So he's probably has most of the solving of the problem already done. So that's what he's in it for. What he's not willing to do is to have them pay him for them to build it opposite of the way he designed it. So remember at the Sanborn house, when he realizes there's a mistake, he sees that there's a wing that he needs to do something else, and he can't unsee the error that he made. So he's willing to take the entire commission that he's been paid to fix that error. So it's the same kind of thing. He can't he's not willing to be paid for somebody else to bastardize his creation. And this will come into play later on, of course, but think of it this way. If Michelangelo were to carve the David, but then somebody else adds something to it, every time Michelangelo sees it, it's this complete disintegration in his mind. He knows what it's supposed to look like, and it doesn't look like it. It's that kind of a problem in the brain, and Rourke knows what's going to happen. He's had this experience with Sanborn House. The wing was wrong. He had to fix it. He did whatever is necessary, including his own pocket, to fix it. So he isn't really turning down the opportunity to design the bank. He's actually designed it already. He's just turning down the opportunity for them to build his design in a way that doesn't reflect the way he designed it. So just wanted to put that in. There's a little bit of a difference. It's a little detail that she puts in. She keeps it very subtle, but those details matter.
Excellent, excellent point. Okay, folks, so last question on
that. Since
go ahead.
Sherri took that route, I'm going to just say, why does he not take up a job? Why does he not sell his soul, really, is what it is. So it's about the same bank where the committee is telling him to make a classic motive to the facade, and he doesn't want to do that. And Howard Rourke spoke for a long time. He explained why his structure could not have a classic motive on its facade. He explained why an honest building, like an honest man, had to be one piece and one faith. What constituted the life force, the idea in any existing thing or creature, and why the smallest part committed treason to the idea, the thing of the creature was dead, and why the good, the high, noble on earth was the only witch that kept its integrity. And Laura, I'm going to read from Kindergarten Chats for you. So this is where Sullivan talks about the Roman temple, and he says, when scholarship becomes a habit of mind, that very habit unquestionably enfeebles creative power. The deepest reach of our scholarship will only reveal this, that the Roman temple was part of the Roman life, not of American life, that it beat with the Roman pulse, was in touch with Roman activities, and that it waned with Roman glory. It died a Roman death. The Roman temple can no more exist, in fact, on Monroe Street in Chicago, USA, than Roman civilization exists. Then can Roman civilization exist there? So, why these two men will not compromise is because they believe in the integrity of the structure. And as Sherri said, it's not that he is not going to pay his bills or work to pay his bills, but he'll choose a different route that he can justify to himself and say, this is who I believe, or what I believe is right.
I'll give a quick example of sound. Like if you're a musician who really, really loves music, and if it's a choice between trying to compose music that you hate and waiting on tables, you'd definitely choose waiting on tables, because it's going to do you almost irreparable harm to be composing something that you hate. It's
okay. Okay, so sure. I know you want to talk about Dominique, but we all took over in that.
Yes.
So I should talk about this because I am the world's greatest expert on it because I've lived this.
Yes.
Dominique?
No, not Dominique.
I was going to say what?
But this issue of why not just do something to pay the bills?
Oh,
as a writer,
yep.
What really, when Rourke explains it to you very early on, he says, I don't have clients. I don't build in order to have clients. I have clients in order to build. Mm-hmm. So his whole thing is, I have a thing I want to do. I want to build buildings of this particular type. His goal isn't, I want to make money. His goal is, I want to make money so that I can afford to have this job of, he charges a commission. This is something, by the way, I have to be police on Sherri, and she's police on me on this way. And that When we get a
True.
project that we really like,
Mhm.
we will charge too little for it
Mhm.
because we want to, we will have a tendency to charge too little for it because we're so excited about the project. We want this to go forward. We don't want to charge, we don't want to ask for too much and then maybe it won't go through.
You want to see that thing
So-
exist in reality. out
So
in
the
world.
payment is really there. It's like I get paid so that I can afford to do this job that I love. And that's work 100%. So, I always think about it. And in this case, she sends him to the quarry because this is sort of his alternative, the alternative. She wants to make the alternative seem as bad as possible. But in reality, for me, for somebody like me, the alternative was if I wanted to make money, I could go to Wall Street. I could go to Silicon Valley. I could have tried to see if Sri could get me a job at Microsoft back in the day. That would have worked out really well. But the thing is, I probably wouldn't be anywhere near as good at it, or the part of the dilemma is I wouldn't be anywhere near as good. I wouldn't be as motivated because it's not what I really want to do. But it would also be, it would be me making more money, but not doing what I want to do. So, the thing is for work, it's, the getting paid is incidental to the motivation is I have an idea for what I want to do. And that the money and the pay is really just to help me get to that. This is what I want to do.
Continuing on this theme, Dominique.
Yeah, I guess because we've been studying the design way, and in the design way, it's very client focused, right? So I guess I don't even think it's an issue. Like, I understand what everybody else is saying. And, I think work is right if he's not going to do the design that the client wants, to not take the job or to get rid of the job. But I guess in a sense, it's, I understand it in terms of art and in terms of, you create this thing. But I think with architecture, like particularly for the bank, it has to be something that the client wants and the client can live with. So I don't know if work really would have ownership if he's not the one who has to deal with the building. And I'm not saying work is wrong. I'm just saying there's another perspective. Like, I mean, I guess I just don't hold work in the highest esteem as that, especially if you're, and I get that he said he's getting clients so that he could do his own work. I get that. I think I'm just taking it from another perspective from the design way is that, if you're trying to give the client what they want and what they need, I think work is really inflexible. And I think this is where my problem lies with work, is that he is very inflexible in that you're creating something for someone else that they have to live with. And yet you're being so inflexible that it's almost detrimental to the relationship. And I get it. He's his own guy. But I guess that's why I just can't see the hero in him.
Thank you, Dominique. Next up is Joe, followed by Maritza. Joe.
Yeah, so this is interesting how it fits into the design way. And as much as I agreed with Dominique the first time, I'm going to kind of disagree the second time. It is that this idea, how do you form intention and how do you know where you're aiming? And Rob actually captured that beautifully, is that what are your core values? And then when you have these core values, just certain things can't be violated within those core values, that you have certain principles that you're going to stand by as an architect or as a person, and that it's not necessarily being rigid or inflexible. It's just that you have a set of principles that are actually, you need to state very simply, and that can't be in conflict with one another. That's a really important point. And I can give examples, but I don't want to talk forever. But but it's more about Howard work is where his desired outcome for his life, not just his desired outcome for a particular project. So that he has this, and this is what makes work who he is that he actually knows what that is. And so, I mean, I think that that's a really important point when we're talking about the design way of moving forward with intention. That's the intentional change in what is on the top cover of the book, intentional change in a, I don't know, unpredictable world, I think it says. And so essentially he knows what his outcomes that he wants to be. And that's really important in order for you to understand meaningful work, which is actually the point of his existence, is meaning. It's not necessarily just to exist within the system that already exists. And this is really kind of gets into creating the non-existing as well. How do you bring something into being? Anyway.
Thank you, Joe. I'll just add one more point about the design way, Evanik. This is the same point that Jeng was complaining about. She says, many of her clients will come to her saying, I want this kind of a house. And it's very, and she says, it's very ugly. They've not even thought about what they need. And the job of the architect is to actually figure out what the client needs. Clients don't necessarily have, because they have all kinds of other goals. Like, they want to impress other people with this, those kind of things. So it's kind of parsing out the problem of what you're trying to design and trying to explain. And then you have limited time, so you choose the clients that you want. I mean, basically you choose to build what you want to build and find clients to do that. And that's how. So let's go to Maritza, followed by Rupali. Maritza.
Okay, go ahead.
I have two comments. First, I want to comment really quickly on what Evanique said. I think it's just a matter of changing perspectives, because I have never viewed work to be somebody whose goal is to serve the client. He's not there for the clients. The clients are a necessary vehicle through which to build houses. His goal is to breathe life into buildings with a certain aesthetic. And that's what I view is what he's marching towards. The client is just the vehicle he's using. And remember, he turns down all these clients because he's looking for the right clients. And what we're shown is that he's not just saying it's my way or the highway. He is, but he's doing it in a manner that he's telling them, this is the manner in which I work. If we agree to this now, I will not allow you to negate upon our agreement. I will stand firm because it means that much to me. The integrity of the commitment is something we're shown also through Ayn Rand's writing, the manner in which she writes. I mean, remember, this is fiction, right? He's the ideal. So it's like because he is a fictional character, he does not require as much bendiness as we may need in real life, because he's the ideal. So that was I just wanted to put that out there, that, we're being shown the ideal of making a commitment and not only keeping to it unerringly, but demanding that those with whom one interacts also keep to that agreement. That's the way I view it. Now, I did want to say what I was originally going to say. I want to tie together the view of the manner in which Howard Roark selects his clients or turns down clients, and the manner in which Dominique selects work or selects people with whom to interact. The parallels I see there is that they have, and to steal Joe's phrase, a similar desired outcome, but they go by it, about it in these like opposed mannerisms, but you see the same thing. She is purposefully selecting those things which hold zero meaning, while he's only selecting those which hold all the meaning. And I find it to be a really interesting parallel, because eventually the two will converge, right? But for now, and again, if we look at it, if we take what I've been doing, right? How do we see ourselves in each of these characters? What you see is that none of us is all Roark or all Dominique, but there's a little bit of Roark and Dominique in all of us. At times, we are going to be the ones who want to painstakingly attempt to pad ourselves from anything meaningful, because we're just that dejected with the world we see around us. Roark doesn't have that dejection. He's not. He is, in his own way, he's the absolute optimist. If you think about it, He really truly believes that a world exists where all these people eventually are going to allow him to build buildings as he sees them in his mind. Even though he keeps seeing all these people who are scoffing at his ideas, but it doesn't faze him. He has blinders. He knows the path he's going to walk, and he lets nothing allow him to stray from there. And that's, I mean, that, like I said, the ideal, it's a beautiful ideal. And as a work of fiction, I think that the author does a phenomenal job of shining that spotlight and saying, I want to reach there. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Rupali, followed by Rob and Sherri. And then we are going to have a rematch of the pro Dominique and anti Dominique next time. Okay, the teams will get to compete next time. You can get your jerseys, you can choose your numbers, and we will go at it next time. But it's going to be Rupali followed by Rob and Sherri. Rupali.
So I wanted to talk about, Rourke when he would compromise. So there is an example of him trying to accommodate in the Sanborn house. And you can see, no contractor was willing to take that project. And then there was a contractor who did, and he hated all architects. The construction of the Sanborn house proceeded through the months of summer and fall, each day bringing new battles. And I wrote a note over there. How does that feel? If you're an architect trying to kind of accommodate everything, I see Sherri nodding her head. You give an inch, and then you see it's all taken over because now you've compromised for the first time. And that's the expectation that, oh, you've compromised, you're going to do it again and again and again. There is no end to that. But if it has been thoughtfully designed at the first time itself, then it's not such an exhausting process. I see this even at the school, where parents will tell me what is best and what is right. And I have to use my judgment and say, this is what's right for the child. And this is where we see the path. And if I give in to parent demands and say, all right, we will do it this time, and then it's the next thing and the next thing. And it's a very, very, very exhausting process where there is really no win-win at the end. And you have to know what you're doing and need to know that you can stand on your principles and the values. So I think that's where Rourke is coming from.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Rob and Sherri.
There we go.
Okay, so one of the points I wanted to make about this too is that, and this works for both of us, is that I always say that when you go for a job interview, the person who is offering you the job is interviewing you, but you're also interviewing them, right? And this happens with their clients, with clients too. That when she meets with the client is trying to figure out, is this an architect I want to hire, and she's also trying to figure out, is this a client I want to work with? Because
they don't usually realize that I'm doing that, but that's okay.
But I mean, but it's what you do in every job. So is this going to be is this Mrs. Sanborn? Is this going to be somebody who because one of the things she looks at is are the husband and wife on the same page? How are they going to work together? She has a client she's working for now who are terrific clients. She loves working for them, and it's because they're really good at making decisions. Like they really have a really
of each other,
and they're making decisions together and balancing the different things. They make decisions really well, and other people don't make decisions really well, and they have and haw and they go back and forth. And so there are better clients and worse clients. So it's, I think that's sort of what Rourke is doing with these meetings that they show. Now Ayn Rand heightens it by adding lots of extra elements because she has a theme she wants to get across. By the way, I also think the whatever he's skipping over, because Ayn Rand's a good writer and she made you skip over it, is the real thing that is sort of artificial in the end of part one, is that Rourke has Mike and Heller offering to give him money just to keep his office open, and he turns it down. Well, why would he turn it down? I'd take it. But if anybody wants, I'll give you my Venmo if anybody wants to help me out. But the thing is, but Ayn Rand doesn't make a big deal about it. It's not like it's not necessarily a big matter of principle, because if it were a big matter of principle, she'd get a scene in which she explains it, or in which she's forced to make that decision. It would get a lot of treatment. It just sort of, it's slipped in there in passing, so you don't even notice it. Because the only real reason he has to do that is because he needs to go to the quarry, because that moves the plot forward.
Yeah.
Right? So that's where the writer is on board. The writer is steering it in jar. He has to go to the quarry so that he can form a better contrast to the spectacular outward success of Peter Keating. And he has to go to the quarry because he has to meet Dominique when he's at the bottom of the heap, when he's the lowest of the low, and when he's totally unrelated to anything having to do with architecture. So I mean, he goes to the quarry because that moves the plot forward, not because it was actually 100% necessary in his actual situation.
That's what fiction's for.
But that's because she's a fiction writer, so she's going to move through that way, and she knows that there's that issue. Well, why doesn't he just take a little money from Heller, pay him back later? You know, the Enright House will come in within like a year, or 6 months or a year.
Yeah.
You know, he could pay him back later. Why doesn't he do that? Well, he doesn't do that because she needs him to do something else to move the plot forward.
Excellent. All right, folks. This is amazing. And next time we're going to do part 2 from chapters 1 through 5, because 6 is when the sermons in stone are published. So that starts off a new chapter there. So I think 1 to 5 is the right unit, and look forward to seeing you then. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, guys. You guys did a great job.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Bye.